G'day, mate. 40 here. So in terms of status and prestige as a writer on a scale of 1 to 10, right, I would rank as a 1 compared to a 10, such as David Samuels. Right, David Samuels is an elite writer, right, American fiction and nonfiction writer. He is the editor of County Highway. How can I compete with that level of prestige? Right, which he founded with Walter Kern, fellow conspiracy theorist. He's a contributing writer at the New York Times Magazine. He's a longtime contributing editor at Harper's Magazine. He's a contributor to The Atlantic, N+1, The New Yorker, and he is the literary editor of Tablet Magazine, which is under the direction of his wife, Alana Samuels. So he graduated with a BA degree from Harvard. He was the editor of Harvard Lampoon. He became a Mellon Fellow in the Humanities at Princeton, where he received a master's degree in history in 1993. He wrote a controversial 1991 cover story on rap music in the New Republic. And he just has prestigious publications after prestigious publications, which makes it bewildering. Is there nobody in his life who cares about him that he listens to with any respect? Right? He has just increasingly gone off the deep end over the past few years. So it's a combination of sheer laziness and the most shoddy reasoning, just unbelievable levels of idiocy, combined with stunning levels of lunacy, combined with some thoughtful, provocative points. And it's this bewildering mixture that lends a certain bewildering quality to his work. Now, the laziness was embodied in his long interview with Kevin McDonald from a couple of years ago, where he advanced the story not 1 centimeter because he was too lazy to do any work. And so he has just so sunk himself into conspiracy theories that doing the work of making a cogent, coherent argument and developing facts and some basic sense of epistemics is apparently below him. So as men get older, right, we naturally incline towards feeling ourselves deserving of more and more respect and appreciation. Right, so men in their 20s and 30s, when they're building their kingdom, right, they don't particularly need appreciation. But when you move through your 40s into your 50s and you had your share of success, right, you are particularly hungry for appreciation, and your world starts expanding beyond the narrow work of your 20s and 30s of building your kingdom. And so you regard yourself as more and more worthy of appreciation, and then this can often lead to no longer wanting to do the hard work of checking facts and making a coherent argument. So here is his lengthy essay in yesterday's Tablet magazine, Why Tucker Carlson Became America's Conspiracist-in-Chief. So let's get one definition just out of the way. Conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory, as it is denoted, means a joining together of 2 or more parties in a theory or in an action. But that is not how people use conspiracy theory in regular discourse. Conspiracy theory, as it's used in contemporary discourse, means something that is factually absurd and has been rebutted and debunked by all those with expertise in the relevant area. Right, so there is the denotative meaning, the literal meaning of a phrase, right? Conspiracy theory, the literal meaning is 2 or more parties joined together to conspire. But that's not how it's talked about, right? That is not how it's used in discourse because, of course, conspiracy theories happen all the time. At a law firm, right? 2 partners get together and decide something. At a business, 2 partners get together and decide something. At a school, right, 2 or more people in your class get together and decide something. That's never called a conspiracy theory. So to use conspiracy theory with regard to the conspiracies that take place thousands of times every day all around us and are obviously true, has nothing to do with how the term conspiracy theory is used. And so to mix those two denotative and connotative meanings of conspiracy theories, to just deliberately mix them up, shows that you are running some kind of deception or or you're just a really shoddy reasoner. So I'm going to skip the first 3 paragraphs of his piece, which concludes with Puffy has proof that Michelle Obama is a man and Jay and Bay are Illuminati, and who has that proof in their hands now that Puffy is in jail? I will tell you exactly who's controlling the information that you get from your phone. The answer is Google. All right, let's just skip that nonsense. All right, now he starts to try to make a serious point. Americans are a friendly, easygoing, even-tempered people. Americans are so incredibly diverse now that this is incoherent. That makes no sense. Some Americans are friendly, some are unfriendly. Some are easygoing, some are incredibly intense, even-tempered, some are even-tempered, just as many are not even-tempered. Right? The notion that Americans now have certain quantifiable traits that obviously distinguish them from Norwegians or Australians, not true anymore. Right? Americans have generally proved over time to be immune to the ideological contagions that have plagued Europe. Okay, so does he mean communism and fascism? Yes, Americans have been immune to those ideological contagions. But if he means various racial and social identity and other left-wing theories, if he means wokeness, obviously Americans are not immune from those ideological contagions. And to whatever extent, you can trace them back to the Frankfurt School in Europe. So there are some ideological contagions that some Americans are proven immune to, but there are plenty of Americans who bought into communism. Right? Not many Americans have bought into fascism, but the idea that Americans are immune to the ideological contagions that have plagued Europe is absurd. Which Americans, which contagions, at which time and place? It's also true that Americans are natural-born conspiracists. Okay, so this is the dishonest phrasing. Right? I would have encountered 100 theories in my life just today, walking around, interacting with people. That is not what we mean by conspiracist. But he says Americans are natural-born conspiracists who are always on the lookout for the key to the hidden secrets of the Illuminati, the Freemasons, and the British royal family. So how many people do you know in your life who are always on the lookout for the keys to the hidden secrets of the Illuminati, the Freemasons, and the British royal family? I do not know one single person. It would be fair to say that not even 1% of Americans are always on the lookout for the keys to the hidden secrets of the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the British royal family. You would be talking less than 0.1% of Americans are always on the lookout for the key to the hidden secrets of the Illuminati, the Freemasons, and the British royal family. How does he get away with publishing such nonsense? And doesn't anybody care about David Samuels and say, look, you're making a total buffoon of yourself. You've done some good work. You've gone off the deep end. I guess his social circle has become fellow conspiracy theorists like Walter Kern. The American Revolution, which led to the founding of the American nation, was rooted in imaginings of secret plots by the British Crown against traditional English liberties by colonials, whose interpretations of events were clouded by heavy doses of 17th century English political theory. Is that really why we rebelled against the English? Well, let's look at the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So I don't hear any lunacy and conspiracy theorizing here. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Right? In this time and place, all men are created equal, meaning that like all other people in the world, Americans are created equal in the sense that they have the right to determine their own political system. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them it shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness, right? And we will do these things for ourselves and for our progeny. So I don't get any crazy conspiracy theorizing here. The Declaration of Independence is a product of its time. It is a product of the dominant liberal rights-oriented philosophy of that time. So this notion that the United States of America was just born out of these crazy, insane conspiracy theories that anyone with expertise would recognize are absurd just does not really seem to stand up. And again, I come back to my basic question. Does not anybody in David Samuel's life care about him, that he is making a total buffoon of himself? Or other people closest to him, are they rejoicing in his idiocy and lunacy combined with the occasional thoughtful, provocative, possibly insightful and important point? About him. I would sure hope that I had some people in my life who gave a damn about me and who would pull me aside and noted, 40, you're not making any sense. That your argument is not logical. It is opposed to the facts. It is largely composed of lunacy. All right, what is the name of the article and who wrote this? The author is David Samuels, who's an incredibly prestigious author. And he's married to the editor of Tablet magazine, Alana Samuels. And the name of the article is Why Tucker Carlson Became America's Conspiracist-in-Chief. Why Tucker Carlson became America's conspiracist-in-chief. Remember, if you are using words in good faith, such as conspiracist and conspiracy theory, you are not referring to literal conspiracy theories that take place thousands of times each day all around us. You're referring to those conspiracy theories that have been debunked, thoroughly debunked by all those with expertise in the particular area, such as there never was a moon landing in 1960 way. Right, the rule of the English and the inherent structure of Crown rule might have been experienced as annoying and even oppressive, but a plot by the English Crown to replace freedom with tyranny existed only in the minds of colonials. Yes, everybody has a sense of oppression, right? Everybody wants to rule, if not the world, all right, their own nation and nation state. And everybody has reasons to feel resentment. So it's true. The English Crown did not have a plot to replace freedom with tyranny, but sometimes in the course of pragmatic actions, such as the American Revolution, you will say hyperbolic things. It's not terribly bizarre. Athletes, before they go into combat, such as in the National Football League or in a boxing match, they will hype them up. They will hype themselves up by saying all sorts of things that are not true, but it revs them up. So people will routinely say things to rev themselves up and to provide themselves with energy and strength and inspiration that are not factually true. The American response to throw off English rule and enshrine protection of the traditional liberties of Englishmen in the Bill of Rights, which was appended to the founding document of the new American nation, thereby institutionalizing popular conspiracism as a foundational condition for the exercise of American state power. Where the hell does he come up with this stuff? Did you realize that the whole basis of the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the American Constitution are a whole bunch of debunked conspiracy theories? Conspiracy theories in the American state are therefore, wow, I must have bitten my tongue because my tongue is intruding against my teeth and I'm biting my tongue as I speak. I mean that literally, not figuratively. I mean that in the denotative sense of biting my tongue, not in the connotative sense of biting my tongue in holding myself back from what I want to say. I am not holding myself back from anything that I want to say right now. I am not speaking ironically or sarcastically or metaphorically. I'm speaking to you literally. Conspiracy theories in the American state are just bound up with each other. The more the state expands its role in the life of its citizens, the more central the language of conspiracism inevitably becomes. Right? Not true. Were there not plenty of conspiracy theories in 18th century America and 19th century America and early 20th century America prior to the era of big government? Right? Is there seriously some dramatic change with regard to the amount of conspiracy theorizing that correlates with the size of government in our lives? I don't think so. All right, let me get a handle on myself here. Let me calm down, play a little centering, decoding the gurus on Darryl Cooper, Nazi apologetics, and disturbances in the discourse.
It's a rather naive view about like Hitler's intentions there. No, it may have been in his strategic interests to have a temporary truce with Britain, or like he might have not have wanted to pursue the conflict.
Right, talking about Darryl Cooper, the popular historian, the greatest popular historian of our time, according to Tucker Carlson, who said that Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II.
Even in the next couple of years. But it's fair to say his aspirations were quite far-reaching in scope based on, historic documents about what Hitler wanted for the Third Reich.
Absolutely. At that point, he'd largely achieved most of his aims in terms of like dominating the entire of Europe. Was already developing plans to basically betray Stalin over the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, where they'd divided up Poland between them. He was going to break yet another agreement and get even more living space to the east. And a peace with the UK, so as not to provide like a launching pad for Allied pressure on the Western Front, would have been very convenient. I have no difficulty believing that.
Yes. So in any case, Churchill, his reason for opposing the Nazis was because he was a warmonger, an alcoholic, psychopath, as Darryl Cooper explains. Like it's well known, very many of the sins of Churchill through his time in power in different stages, right? Like his treatment in India. There's various presentations of him not being purely a heroic figure, right? And Darryl Cooper agrees with those. In general, a very negative presentation, but also it might have been due to some other factors that were motivating him.
And this is 1920, so this is shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution. Basically, the point of his paper is he says these people who are over there, they're all going one direction or the other. They're going to be Bolsheviks. They're going to be Zionists. We want them to be Zionists, and so we need to support this. And so that was early on. There was an ideological component of it. But then as time goes on, you read stories about Churchill going bankrupt and needing money, getting bailed out by people who shared his interests, in terms of Zionism, but also his hostility, I think his hostility to, put it this way, I think his hostility to Germany was real. I don't think that he necessarily had to be bribed to have that feeling. But I think he was, to an extent, put in place by people, the financiers, by a media complex that wanted to make sure that he was the guy who was representing Britain in that conflict for a reason.
Well, that's very reasonable of him to.
All right, let's go back to trying to understand this article here from David Samuels. So there's no correlation. Fairly well read in American history. There have been all sorts of popular conspiracy theories long before there was big government. deadly viruses that may or may not have originated from labs in China. Expert opinion says that the COVID virus originated from natural origins. Islamist terror plots, of which there are many. Pedophile rings, of which there are some. Foreign hackers, of which there are many. School shooters, many. Network of communist spies stealing atomic secrets, there were such. Jewish and Italian anarchists from Europe plotting to assassinate the President of the United States, leading industrialists, Northern abolitionists, Southern secessionists, Freemasons, Papists. Okay, all of these refer to phenomena that were entirely real and also used as excuses to abridge or abrogate the individual rights and freedoms guaranteed to every American as a condition for any government existing here at all. Right. There has never been a working democracy that has not provided for the abrogation of any and all rights in times of emergency. So, on the basis in David Samuel's head of where rights and freedoms should be in the United States compared to the reality in American history, then, yeah, this is just dastardly true, that unbelievable that rights were taken away at times of crisis. But whenever democracies experience real or purported emergencies, they always have the ability to abridge and abrogate individual rights and freedoms, right? There's nothing unique here about America. This is how democracy works in every nation that has a working democracy. There is no exception. It's not like this is just some crazy American exception. So he talks about this as though this is just some astounding and bad faith development in American history that apparently has no counterpart outside the United States. If every single working democracy does exactly the same thing, meaning abridge and abrogate individual rights and freedoms in times of putative and real emergencies, then you cannot say there's something particularly American about it. Just like racial issues in America mirror racial issues everywhere else in the world that you have these similar proportion of races. Right? There's absolutely nothing unique about race relations in America. There's absolutely nothing unique about conspiracy theories in America and the use of threats to the public order to reduce individual freedoms in times of real and putative emergency. This happens in every single working democracy. Right? Was it only Americans who lost rights of freedom of assembly and freedom of speech during COVID? No, Americans had it easier with regard to losing rights under COVID than pretty much every other first world nation of which I'm aware, with some exceptions, but the Americans were generally in the fewest substantial loss of rights compared to Britain, France, Germany, and most other first world nations. Conspiracism can be the mark of healthy resistance to unwelcome government control. So this is just so dishonest because the way conspiracism and conspiracy theories is used in normal discourse is to only refer to those conspiracy theories that have been thoroughly debunked by those with expertise in the topic. Just as conspiracism is also the natural language of forces that wish to get Americans to embrace centralized power at the expense of their liberties. Yes, you can have people believing crazy things on all sides of the political spectrum. Who would have thought it? Right? You can have people believing irrational, non-empirical conspiracy theories from the left, from the center, and from the right. Amazing. Right? People whose lives aren't working will embrace, very likely, conspiracy theories to give themselves a feeling of importance when everything else is just falling apart in their life. Negotiating a landscape in which conspiracism is the lingua franca doesn't simply mean believing in whatever conspiracy theories come down the pike. Yeah, we did not evolve to be gullible. We would not be here as a species if we naturally evolved to be gullible. I don't know about you, but I lead my life and I don't find myself having to do a lot of negotiating a landscape in which conspiracism is the lingua franca. I don't find it that difficult. I don't find it that perplexing. I don't find it bringing down the quality of my life. It's not making me unhappy. It's just not a problem because I see through the BS. It requires a far greater degree of intellectual rigor and talk talk than reading a newspaper did. I don't think so. I think he just entirely made that up. Back in the days when publishers and editors could credibly promise to tell the truth to their readers, what you regard as true substantially depends upon your hero system. Right? Newspapers have always been a business, and you did not make profit in this business by telling things to your readers that they did not want to hear. So newspapers and news media as a business have always primarily relied upon the production of bureaucratic reports. Because when you publish things that have a piece of official bureaucratic paper behind them, you cannot be sued for libel. That is the nature of the news media business in 2024, and in 1994, and in 1904, and in 1804. There's no change here to these basic facts. But apparently, now that conspiracism is our lingua franca, we're required to be a good reader, which presupposes the ability to see the language and the forms of conspiracism as separate from the content of a conspiracy theory, which, like any other theory, can be empirically shown to be either true or false. This is nonsense. You don't need to read the news to lead a good life. There are some ways where reading the news can enhance your understanding of the world around you. Overall, it's probably more likely to confuse and obfuscate the world around you. You are not required to be a good reader to navigate reality. In fact, consumption of the news may, well, more likely than not, make you less adept at reading reality if you confuse the news with what is true. News is the product of bureaucratic reports. That's how it has always been. That is the basis for news as a business, because you can't get sued for republishing bureaucratic reports. Take the obsession with Jews who control the world. As a conspiracy theory, anti-Semitism is inherently different than social prejudices against outsiders. Oh, what a brilliant point. There are ways that anti-Semitism is different from other prejudices. And there are ways that anti-Semitism is similar. So coming out with a statement, oh, anti-Semitism just inherently different from other social prejudices. Yeah, there are some ways. Guess what? There are some ways that prejudices against Pakistanis are different from other prejudices. Right? There are some ways that Aboriginals are different from every other type of human being in the world. And there are other ways in which they're similar. This is such shoddy, low-brow reasoning. No one imagines that because outsiders smell bad or are habitual thieves and liars that they also control the world. Yes, Jews happen to have disproportionate amounts of success in certain fields. So if you want to understand how the world works with regard to banking or the news media or large swaths of the academy or politics, Jews are disproportionately influential. And it is a normal, natural human desire to wish for a magic key to unlock how the world works, and Jews are a tempting answer to that. Now, are there a wide range of everyday phenomena that can be explained with reference to Jews' unique world-shaping evil? I don't believe so. I don't believe that there's a wide range of everyday phenomena that can be explained with reference to the unique world-shaping evil of any people or of any religion. But while anti-Jewish prejudice or resentment of Jewish success is as normal as any other kind of social prejudice or resentment, it is also an easy gateway to anti-Semitism of the totalizing conspiratorial variety. I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. We had tremendous prejudice against Roman Catholics. Guess what? Anti-Catholic prejudice and resentment is also an easy gateway to anti-Catholicism of the totalizing conspiratorial variety. Right? There are many loathings of groups that become easy gateways to a totalizing conspiratorial variety. Right? This is not something that's unique to negative perspectives on Jews. But apparently anti-Semitism is an operating theory that is based on a false premise about the nature of reality, and thereby envelops its victims in a world of interlocking illusions, which eventually leaves them unable to identify the powers that are actually impacting their lives. Right, the outside world is far more complicated than we'll ever know. will only ever have a roughly approximate understanding of the real powers that impact our lives. There are many anti-Catholic, anti-Muslim, anti-white people, anti-black people, anti-brown people operating theories based on false premises about the nature of reality that envelop us. Generally speaking, conspiracy theories are not what is enveloping their victims in a world of interlocking illusions. Conspiracy theories are the product of people whose lives that don't work. It's not conspiracy theories that are ruining people's lives. It is that people with ruined lives try to make themselves feel better by justifying their ineptitude and lack of success with conspiracy theories. Right? He is mixing up the consequence with the cause. One easy way to tell whether a conspiracy theory is potentially constructive or dangerous, therefore, is by evaluating its effects on believers. Well, nobody who is high achieving buys into conspiracy theories, right? The most successful people you know, people who earn more than $1 million a year, are not buying into what is popularly regarded as conspiracy theories, with few and rare exceptions. An obsession with the poisons in your water may be very constructive and of enormous social benefit. If the old battery factory next to your house is leaching carcinogens into the regional water supply, yes. So for 0.001% of Americans, an obsession with the poison in your water is likely very constructive, but for 99.99% of Americans, it is not. An obsession with the aliens who build the pyramids or focus on people who change into wolves at night and steal your chi is unlikely to tell you much of anything about the forces that actually impact your life, though it may deepen your suspicion of authority. Again, he's confusing effect with cause, right? The reason that people believe ridiculous things is because their life isn't working. And because they meet with so much humiliation and failure in their day-to-day life, they then have to seize on things that make them feel superior. And conspiracy theories meet that need. Absent any ability to demonstrate causes and effects related to real-world phenomena, these theories or fixations are simply kooky. Right. Everything that is popularly regarded as a conspiracy theory, given that it's been thoroughly debunked by experts, is not going to be of service to you. By the time one gets to the hidden hand of the Illuminati in fixing global energy prices or the role of the Federal Reserve Bank in systematically devaluing gold, one is more likely to find oneself a prisoner of a conspiracy theory of the repetitive, totalizing, self-validating sort that causes its believers to wind up angry, alienated, and depressed. Oh, you really think that these people weren't angry, alienated, and depressed prior to embracing these conspiracy theories? He is mixing up the effect with the cause. Only angry, alienated, and depressed people buy into these stupid conspiracy theories. The totalizing thrust of these beliefs progressively separates believers from the world of observable causes and effects, causing them to lose their hold on reality. Do you think that if they had a hold on reality in the first place, that they would buy into these ridiculous theories? They're already separated from normal, healthy people because they're losers, and healthy people don't want to hang out with losers. So they're already losers. They're already alienated from decent people. And now they are just trying to seize onto something to provide their life with meaning and purpose when nothing is working for them. Good conspiracy theories are those that have the potential to produce greater amounts of truth. Who shot JFK? We know who shot JFK. It was one guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. Because we know that Lee Harvey Oswald shot JFK, we know that no conspiracy theory about the shooting was correct, because nobody, not the mob, not the CIA, not the FBI, not LBJ's henchmen, right? No group would ever choose Lee Harvey Oswald to carry out an assassination. Did COVID come from a lab in China? Well, according to the people with expertise, it did not. And make it more likely for adherents to discover who is doing what to them and why. Bad conspiracy theories have the opposite effect, directing attention away from real causes and effects toward phantoms. Right, this is just so duplicitous and dishonest. The way conspiracy theories are used in normal discourse is to only refer to those theories that have been thoroughly debunked by experts. Immediately after Lee Harvey Oswald's death, and for decades afterward, the serial oddities and disjunctions of his story. Right, within an hour of Lee Harvey Oswald shooting and murdering John F. Kennedy, He'd been arrested, and the police already had enough evidence to convict him for the crime of murder. It's nothing particularly odd and disjunctive in the sense of casting any doubt on what I just said. Lee Harvey Oswald was a loser. No group would ever hire Lee Harvey Oswald to carry out an assassination of a president. The serial oddities and disjunction of his story have naturally given rise to suspicions that his crime, naturally, the evidence is overwhelming. We know definitively that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John F. Kennedy, and given that John F. Kennedy was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, we know that the CIA and the Mafia and no other group would have ever hired Lee Harvey Oswald to carry out that assassination. It was part of a larger plot by the CIA, the Soviet Union, the Mafia, or elements of each, whether acting separately or in concert. That he would be promoting this as a natural assumption is sheer lunacy. It shows that his epistemics are as bad as Robert F. Kennedy. The Warren Commission, which was the official body appointed by President Lyndon Johnson to investigate the murder of his predecessor, uncovered no overarching plot against President Kennedy's life, because there was no evidence of an overarching plot against President Kennedy's life, though instead it concluded that Oswald had acted alone. In response to doubts about the veracity of the conclusions of the Warren Commission report, the CIA appears to have advanced, if not coined, the term conspiracy theory to cast doubt on doubters of the report's lone gunman theory, whose theorizing no doubt suggested an unhealthy distrust toward government officials and agencies who, as it later turned out, routinely lied to the American public on nearly every subject under the sun. So, yeah, American institutions, officials, and agencies have routinely lied to the American public on nearly every subject under the sun if you regard as lying anything that deviates from 100% truth. So this statement only makes sense if you can point out other nation states where their officials and their agencies never said anything that was less than 100% true. Right? There's never been a community with leaders who only said things that are 100% true. So compared to his vision of what American officials and agencies should say, only dealing in 100% truth, and then compared to the reality of life on planet Earth, right? American officials and agencies have about the same track record with regard to truth as the officials and agencies of every other first world nation. But here he goes. He talks as though there's something unusual in the less than 100% truth pronouncements of American officials and agencies. From the chemicals in their air and water to the health effects of above-ground nuclear testing to the progress of the war in Vietnam to the involvement of the CIA and FBI in manipulating public opinion and routinely violating the civil rights of political dissenters, all of which would be revealed over the course of the following decade, which culminated in the 1974 resignation of Richard Nixon, Kennedy's 1960 Republican opponent, from the presidency in disgrace. Okay, name me one first world nation that has not routinely lied, dissembled, and been less than 100% candid at every opportunity. He cannot, right? Dissembling and lying is an endemic part of the human condition. Even David Samuels engages in it. So were the conspiracy theorists right or wrong? Well, in the way that conspiracy theorist is used, they are wrong, right? We did land on the moon in 1969. Lee Harvey Oswald shot and killed John F. Kennedy. Al-Qaeda did hijack 4 airplanes, and among the things that they accomplished was sending 1 airplane into the Pentagon and 1 airplane into each of the Twin Towers. And any conspiracy theorizing that says that 9/11 was an inside job with explosives set up to take down the Twin Towers is wrong. So simple, right? Pretty much everything that's called a conspiracy theory in popular discourse is wrong. 60 years after Kennedy was shot, and despite the efforts of many top-rate historians, novelists, filmmakers, ballistics experts, and others to conclusively unravel the Oswald Kennedy plot, it was unraveled by the police on the ground within 1 hour of the shooting. You idiot! You have to be a total idiot. Does he not have anyone in his life who gives a damn about him? Are they not embarrassed, or are they just rejoicing seeing himself unravel publicly? Or is he just so mentally ill that he cannot accept any contrary feedback right now? When did David Samuels' downward spiral begin? And why has nobody tried to intervene? And is he just simply impervious to all help? It seems fair to say that reasonable doubt continues to exist about the circumstances and motives surrounding the murder of the young president. No, it doesn't. It was clear. It was obvious within 1 hour of the shooting. It wasn't exactly who he appeared to be either. Well, guess what? I'm not exactly who I appear to be. David Samuels is not exactly who he appears to be. David Samuels' wife is not exactly who she appears to be. We all have a public face and we have a private face. In fact, we have many public faces and we have many private faces because we will all tend to be somewhat different in different situations. Maybe JFK was shot by the mob. No, you idiot, he was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, and the police knew that within an hour. Maybe the mob was an extension of the CIA, which tasked its killers with eliminating Castro. Just total lunacy. One reason that the lone gunman theory remained dominant for as long as it did. Okay, do you understand? The reason the lone gunman theory remained dominant for as long as it did was because it was true and the evidence was overwhelming, and that you have to despise truth. You have to optimize for things other than truth to think for a second that anyone other than Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible for the murder of John F. Kennedy. You have to be impervious to truth to not accept that Lee Harvey Oswald murdered John F. Kennedy. But no, that's not the reason, right? According to David Samuels, you'll never guess why the lone gunman theory remained dominant for as long as it did. It was the Beatles' White Album. Back to David Samuels. Let me just read this paragraph literally. One reason that the lone gunman theory remained dominant for as long as it did, despite its elements of obvious implausibility, was that it fit neatly into a central concern of the philosophy, social theory, and literature of the 1950s and 60s, namely the fate of the individual in an impersonal society run according to the maddening illogic of a machine-driven bureaucracy. This vision informed works of imported popular existentialist philosophy by Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, classics of mid-century American sociology like David Reisman's The Lonely Crowd, the homegrown school of literary absurdism that grew out of the U.S. wars in Europe and Korea, that was perhaps best epitomized in Joseph Heller's Catch-22, and the poetry of Randall Jarrell and his fellow war veterans, Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, as well as later works of literary nonfiction like Frederick Exley's A Fan's Notes, Paul Goodman's Growing Up Absurd, and Joan Didion's Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and The White Album. Wow. Now that I think about it, people with a humanities background do typically reason in this way. Right? This is a very typical type of reasoning for people with an elite education in the humanities, and even a not so elite position in the humanities, or people who are able to make a living in polite society in the humanities. They typically do reason in this slipshod way. And this guy's background is in the humanities. He was a Mellon Fellow in the humanities at Princeton University, where he received a master's degree in history. So I guess he doesn't feel any responsibility. He does not optimize for truth. He doesn't feel much responsibility for truth. And in fact, truth would be inconvenient and awkward and would dull the high that he gets from spinning these absurd theories. So he's very much like the historian Neil Ferguson. Neil Ferguson is a rich man. He could easily afford to hire a but facts and optimizing for truth would reduce his ability to spin the type of theories that give him energy and purpose and meaning in life. I take it that David Samuels now gets energy, purpose, and meaning in life from coming up with and publishing absurd theories frequently contradicted by empirical truth. So he is optimizing for his feelings, for the feeling of excitement, for the feeling of being special, that I'm only me, only I can see through the BS and I can reveal how the world really works. And so he's optimizing his own uniqueness and his own stature, and not putting much value on truth, which is sad because he has a great reputation. Steve Sailer speaks very well of him. For at least the last half of the 20th century, both before and after, I should go back. Right. The reason we have the lone gunman theory is because the facts fit the theory the idea that we have the theory because of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus and works of sociology like The Lonely Crowd and the homegrown school of literary absurdism that grew out of U.S. wars in Europe and Korea? Do you think that for most of the people who fought in Europe and Korea, that they regarded their efforts as absurd? Do you think that anyone who has children and is at all normal and loves his kids thinks that life is absurd? Right, I would reckon that fewer than 10%, fewer than 5% of people who love their children regard life as absurd. I mean, how disconnected from reality, from the normal things that motivate people, such as family, do you have to be to think that we live in an absurd world? Right? If you're at all normal and you like your spouse, you like your kids, you like your family, you like your friends, why on earth would you regard life as absurd? Right? Very few people who have normal relations with friends and family regard life as absurd. You have to have such an overwhelming, verging on pathological desire to be special that you see through the BS and that you notice that we're living in a simulation and life is absurd and there's just one giant operation being run on us by the CIA. Right? You have to be so desperate to stand out and to be special that you have essentially exited from the normal, healthy human condition. So what I'm diagnosing here is a deep pathology with not just David Samuels, but with everyone who allows him to live happily. For at least the latter half of the 20th century, both before and after Kennedy's murder, American intellectuals and writers occupied themselves in a remarkably coherent collective imagining of how life was supposed to go once the sacred mysteries of life and death had been stripped of any higher meaning. The voice they came up with was a kind of studied blankness laced with deadpan absurdist humor, which neither accepted nor denied the possibilities raised by the conspiracy theories, but rather suggested that absurdity, not conspiracy, was the root of the human condition. Is this true? Have overwhelmingly American intellectuals and writers in the last half of the 20th century regarded life as absurd? If so, those intellectuals and writers who regard life as absurd have chosen to exile themselves from the normal, functional, happy lives of regular people who like their friends and family. And it's absurd to suggest that they're primarily motivated by the conception that life is absurd, because for how many of these people, once someone deliberately stepped on their toe, would they just regard that as absurd? For how many of these people who get punched in the face would regard that as absurd? For how many of these people who had children, friends, or a spouse who they loved, and then the children, friends, and a spouse decided to not talk to them anymore, but they go, oh, that's just absurd. Let me just see the humor in that. Right? They will peddle theories of how life is absurd, but even the way they live their life is not at all absurd. Right? People who have their foot deliberately stepped on don't regard that as a gas, as just hilarious. People who love people, and then the people they love ignore them, refuse to talk to them, and run away from them. Nobody is just indifferent to that. Right. All possibilities, from the darkly conspiratorial to the banalities of official speak, were equally absurd and ultimately meaningless. So you think people who genuinely cared about their family and their friends and the quality of the water they drank and the air that they breathed just regarded that as absurd? Right? Why would we have movements to clean up the air, clean up the water, to provide more rights for people, to have a more efficient and effective government, to improve the quality of schools, if our leading lights just thought everything was equally absurd and ultimately meaningless? Right? None of the major philosophical, political, social, cultural movements in this country could have been effectively pushed forward. Know what's going on with David Samuels, but it's highly disconnected from reality. Just because Joseph Heller wrote an absurdist novel about World War II does not mean that Joseph Heller was indifferent to whether or not he got paid for his work, whether he's indifferent to people stepping on his foot, to someone trying to rape him or rob him or stab him or shoot him. Do you think that Joseph Heller was just totally indifferent to his family and friends? Do you think Joseph Heller was totally indifferent to the pursuit of status? and gaining respect and admiration from his peers? I suspect he was not. And I don't know much about the real life of Joseph Heller. So this distinguishing deadpan affect was something that was put on as a performative gesture like this essay to show that you're too cool for school. But it has characterized the lives of almost nobody, right? You have a distinguishing deadpan effect in certain theories, in certain works of literature, certain works of art, but the people who produce these theories and these forms of art and these types of literature were deadly serious about the need to pay their bills, about the need to get paid. They were deadly serious about the people that they loved in their lives. So David Samuels is confusing performance, public performance, with characterizing intellectual life in America. So apparently we were just all about absurdity until 2001, when absurdity lost out to the more colorful costuming of multiculturalism. Foundation-sponsored social realist art that promotes the varieties of identity politics favored by the Democratic Party. Okay, so identity politics is useful for people who like the Democratic Party. And so guess what? When approaches become more useful, they tend to get used more and to receive greater prominence, and approaches that are less useful tend to be used less and tend to have less prominence. There was an in-house alternative to the deadpan affect of the existential absurdist, though, which was widely propagated throughout the popular culture of the late 1980s through the late 1990s in the form of late-night television sketch comedy, the routines of stand-up comedians like Stephen Wright, popular Gen X entertainments like Reality Bites, the films of Richard Linklater, and pretty much the entire corpus of indie rock. That alternative was straight-up conspiracism. And the people who took this seriously and adopted a conspiratorial worldview, not the people running corporations, not the people who are getting ahead in life, not the people who love their family and were upstanding in their work and in their volunteer efforts for community, right? It was perhaps people like David Samuels, who were desperate to feel special so that they would take on the most absurd conspiracy theories. Where the absurdist affect was flat, conspiracists were paranoid and excitable. Much of this conspiracy theorizing and absurdist performance is just performative, right? These are just gigs that people indulge in to make a living and to gain prominence for themselves. Right? Even the people pushing these absurdist and ridiculous conspiracy theory still wanted to be paid and still wanted to hold on to those relationships that were important to them. They did not treat the people that they loved as if they were just absurd jokes. They painted their canvases in vibrating day-glow colors, which they insisted were in fact the colors of reality once the blinders imposed by social conditioning were removed. Yeah, this was an attention-grabbing way to pursue your stand-up comedy or your journalism. If Joan Didion was an existentialist absurdist who became the doyen of a certain type of snobbish and pinched New York Review of Books type intellectual propriety, writers like Ken Kesey and finally Don DeLillo were pulled in a direction that can be best described as Pynchonesque, the strong horse of their aesthetic being Thomas Pynchon, the American novelist whose greatness has been obvious for at least half a century to any capable reader. So, out of all of America's capable readers, how many would you say regard Thomas Pynchon as great? I guarantee you it's less than 1%. But reality and truth is not something that David Samuels is particularly valuing, right? He has things that are far more important to him in his public pronouncements than truth, right? He gets to feel a certain way when he spins webs of lies. And the feelings that he gets by spinning these absurd arguments, they outweigh for him all other considerations, such as considerations of what is true and what is good. Did you know that Thomas Pynchon, his work did more to define the landscape of American fiction than any other single author since World War II? I doubt it. I guarantee you that Ernest Hemingway has had more effect on American fiction since World War II than Thomas Pynchon. Pynchon's work is still a comparative rarity in university English departments, in large part because it remains maddeningly immune to critical analysis and description grounded in either the existentialist absurdist or multicultural social realist aesthetics. For all I know, that may be true. I don't think I've read Thomas Pynchon. Pynchon was a literary outlier, neither an absurdist nor a realist. His characters are types, often verging on caricature. Sounds like Tom Wolfe. Their inner lives were of little interest to the author, not like Tom Wolfe, and resisted any deeper analysis. Within Pynchon's sprawling, conspiracy-driven landscapes, they serve the purposes of the larger narrative, like characters in 17th and 18th century English novels. What mattered was not self-referential authorial play, or the childhood traumas or disappointments suffered by the characters, but rather the larger social patterns and networks in which they moved and functioned, and the ways that those patterns diverged from the language of official description. Those divergences illustrating the author's notions of cause and effect, forming a kind of action critique of rationalist sociological American notions of causality being more or less the point of the work. So David Samuels, I wonder if he's stroking himself off when he writes this stuff. Because he's certainly stroking himself off either literally or figuratively. But, I mean, how many people are going to read this and go, wow, that's really profound, man. That's amazing. I guess most people would only read this if they thought it was good. So is the harsh truth that this highly prestigious, high-status author publishing this absurd essay, that his readers regard this as profound? That's sad. It is debatable when American reality itself took a hard swerve from absurdist to Pynchonesque. Guess what? There has never been a time when the overwhelming majority of American reality was absurdist or Pynchonesque. In fact, at most, you might find 0.1% of American reality ever being absurdist or Pynchonesque. Most people, most of the time, are concerned about their family, their friends, getting an education, making a living, paying their bills, and pursuing their interests and hobbies, and spending time with their community. Right? Nobody lives life whereby their operating system is life is absurd or Pynchonesque. Right? It doesn't happen. Right? The biggest devotees to absurdism and what is Pynchonesque insist on getting paid for their labors, insist on spending time with people they love, and insist on pursuing their interests and hobbies. Pynchon published his masterwork, Gravity's Rainbow, over half a century ago in 1973, which was a year after what proved to be the last Apollo moon landing and the year before Richard Nixon left the White House. 1973 is therefore as good a starting point as any. Well, eventually we'll get to where he calls Tucker Carlson a Fed. Okay, maybe I'll skip the paragraph on Dom DeLillo. Okay. Widespread incredulity toward official denials of conspiracy theories. You don't have incredulity towards ridiculous conspiracy theories that have been thoroughly debunked by people with expertise among people whose lives that work, right? It is solely the province of losers. But anyway, back to Samuels. Widespread incredulity toward official denials of conspiracy theories is the product of another large-scale public event, which is very openly and publicly the result of a conspiracy. Yes, this is literally a conspiracy, just as there are thousands of conspiracies going on around us, but it's not what people mean when they talk about conspiracy theories. You dishonest, deliberately obtuse writer. Namely, the terror attacks orchestrated by Osama bin Laden on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon on September 11, 2001. One result of bin Laden's successful conspiracy was the birth of U.S. counterterrorism doctrine. Right. America developed counterterrorism doctrine in Vietnam in the 1960s. You ignorant, silly, anti-truth nut. Right? That's when we developed counterterrorism theory. There's no substantial development on U.S. counterterrorism doctrine since the Vietnam War in the 1960s. Which since George Bush's 2003 invasion of Iraq has become perhaps the most consequential and long-lived official philosophy employed by the American state to explain its way of seeing and justifying its own actions. American counterterrorism doctrine rejects the idea of lone gunmen almost as an article of faith, focusing instead on the operational, logistical, and financial networks backed by state-level actors that sponsor bombings, assassination, and other acts of terror. Yeah, we wanted to minimize the chances of Americans getting hurt by terrorism. I'm not sure that that requires some philosophical doctrine. It is therefore sensible to say that after 2002, conspiracism became not simply an adjunct to, but the official philosophy and action of the American state. Whoa! How the hell did he get there? Right, that Osama bin Laden operated with logistical and financial network accommodated by state-level actors such as Afghanistan, right? This is empirically true. It doesn't require any crazy conspiracizing. There's nothing about counterterrorism or America's foreign policy that requires conspiracism. For readers whose primary interest is politics, however, there is a simpler answer to the question of when conspiracism took over. It doesn't require rereading the Warren Commission's report and old Thomas Pynchon novels. I think the Warren Commission is like 12 volumes. So it would take the normal bloke, 1,000 hours to read it? Or even looking back to 9/11. That answer is Russiagate. My God. I'm doing the work of the Lord here. Hope you appreciate it.
Exclude Jewish financier bribery as a motivating factor for Churchill.
Oh, he didn't exclude it, though. He said it like Churchill might have not liked Germany, but it's clear that he was put in position by financiers who supported his views about Zionism and other unnamed things, right? And the media, Matt, the media complex. Because Churchill...
Comment in the chat. I thought this was about Tucker. How long till we get there? So, are you saying that I should have called this stream Decoding David Samuels? Believe me, it's all going to be worth it. It's going to be great. The Russiagate plot, as it unfolded on the front page of every newspaper and by every establishment media outlet in the country, was clearly a conspiracy theory in the old-fashioned paranoid absurdist sense. It held that the 2016 election had supposedly been swayed not by a sour public mood or sweeping social and economic changes brought on by the spread of digital technology, or by Hillary Clinton's obvious deficiencies as a campaigner, or by the fact that 8 years of Obama not brought the kinds of change that many American voters in both parties had fantasized about, but by the butterfly effect of $100,000 worth of Russian-bought Facebook ads. I guess this is how people in the humanities write, because he's not constructing a very strong argument here, right? Most everything published in the prestige press about Russiagate was true. The inferences that people took from these articles were not true in the sense that Russia's influence on the 2016 election was significant. So to the extent the elite media pushed the narrative that Russia's influence in 2016 was significant, that is false. But the details of this Trump-connected person talking to this Russia-connected person at this date, or that Russia messed with our election. Russia did mess with our election. All right, China, I'm sure, messes with our election. Israel messes with our elections. Right? Many countries mess with our elections. There was never any evidence that Russia's interference, Russia did interfere with our election, was ever significant. But most of the prestige press articles about Russia's interference were factually true. They weren't just lying and making stuff up. Trump was absurdly linked to Vladimir Putin. Well, you can link somebody to somebody and find some basis in fact. His supposed paymaster. The prestige press was not publishing articles that Vladimir Putin was Trump's paymaster. They were not saying that literally. They were saying things that were usually literally true through intermediaries such as the Russian mafia or the Chabad-Lubavitch Hasidic sect. Right? The elite media was not making that case explicitly. People would implicitly take it away from what they read, but the New York Times was not just publishing lies, generally speaking, with regard to Russiagate. It was factually true and of almost no importance or relevance. It was easy to imagine Pynchon out in Mendocino County or Manhattan chortling with glee over his morning paper. As the details of the Russiagate plot became increasingly phantasmagoric and absurd, well, the literal things that the elite media was publishing were not usually phantasmagoric and absurd. They were usually literally true and simply lacking in importance and relevance. The American media abandoned its former role as a truth-telling apparatus. When has American media been a truth-telling apparatus? It is a business that relies on the pronouncements of bureaucracies. Right? The news media is never primarily optimized for telling the truth, and explicitly joined what it called the resistance, awarding itself Pulitzer Prizes for uncovering stories that in reality were invented and fed to them by Democratic Party operatives. When has it ever been different? When, oh Lord, when, David Samuels, has it ever been different? Walter Duranty won the Pulitzer Prize for lying about Stalin's deliberately caused or accidentally caused famine of the Ukrainians. The fact that the stories were often outright fakes made no difference. All right, where are your footnotes? He has no footnotes in this story. He feels no obligation to back up his statements. Right? These stories were overwhelmingly not fakes. These stories were overwhelmingly factually true and of no importance. It's such a simple distinction, but it somehow evades David Samuels. The role of the press, as its leading lights announced in public, had changed. Objective reporting of facts was out. When was objective reporting of facts in? Right, American journalism, yeah, by and large, was more objective than, say, European journalism, but has always been shaped by the hero systems of the people who do the reporting and the editing and the promotion. Right, journalists have always thought that it was fine to exaggerate the importance of what they were publishing or promoting. In effect, the substantial exaggerations that are part and parcel of journalism for as long as we've had journalism and reporting in the news business, right, are forms of lying. It has always been such. Righteous political engagement, right? What passes for righteous or evil entirely depends upon your hero system. There's no objective righteousness unless you first subscribe to a particular hero system that you find some basis for proclaiming that your hero system is objecting. Righteous political engagement, i.e. acting as a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party and its operatives, was in. Well, even the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, they still did plenty of criticism of Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. It's not like they only carried water for the Democratic Party. So this is just not factually true. It was not just contra Trump, who was regularly portrayed as a would-be dictator rather than a buffoon with ADHD. Right, so portraying Trump as a would-be dictator is absurd. Portraying Trump as someone who frequently acts the buffoon with ADHD is accurate. But on a wide range of social issues advanced by the Democratic Party on which normal repertorial skepticism reporting was no longer licit. Okay, so where were they doing it better? Which countries has better journalism, better news media? Where are they doing better? On planet Earth, right, American elite media is pretty good in some ways, pretty bad in other ways. Just like I'm pretty good in some ways and pretty bad in other ways. Just like you're pretty good in some ways and pretty bad in other ways. Right? All individuals and the institutions that they create have flaws. As a result, public trust in the press, which hovered around 50% for half a century or so, plummeted to barely above 20%. Right? These statistics are highly dubious. He does not footnote them, meaning that no one outside the party faithful believed a word that they wrote. Right? Anyone who was serious believed those things that they wrote that were obviously factually true, which was most of what they wrote on Russiagate was factually true. It was the spin. It was the narrative that was constructed on top of the elite news media reporting that was often absurd. By itself, the Trump Russiagate coverage would have been an epochal disaster for the American press, involving the destruction of relationships with the readers that had taken a century to build. Oh, so prior to Russiagate, Republicans by and large felt like the press was giving them a fair go. Right? That's not true. Right? People did not evolve to be gullible. People recognize that those writing and editing and presenting and selling the news have agendas that are often different from their own agenda. Why did we have Richard Nixon elected twice as president of the United States when overwhelmingly our elites inside the news media and outside the news media were viscerally opposed to Richard Nixon? Because the preferences of elites, including the elites dominating the news media, didn't matter much because people did not evolve to be gullible. Right? Americans elected Ronald Reagan twice, even though overwhelmingly elites were opposed and appalled by that. Americans elected George W. Bush twice, even though our elites were overwhelmingly appalled by that. Then it got worse. The promotion of the Russiagate conspiracy narrative was followed by the embrace by the press of a quasi-official role in which contrary opinions were to be actively censored by large technology companies. Oh, so this hasn't happened before. It's obvious that different groups have different gifts, but simply noting that in the news media has been forbidden since at least the 60s. Right? When has the news media not sided when it was to their advantage with political power? Right? People do things that are to their advantage. So the idea that this is something brand new, oh my God, we've got elite journalists now siding with other elites, and they are trying to push certain narratives that favor their particular hero system. Oh my God, when did this begin? This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. This never happens in any other country. This happens in every other country. This happens all the time. This always happens with journalism and news and with elites, right? Everybody wants to rule the world with their particular hero system. The promotion of the Russiagate conspiracy narrative was followed by the embrace by the press of a quasi-official role. When have the press not welcomed a quasi-official role when they could pull it off, in which contrary opinions were to be actively censored by large technology companies and the government, an effort which blossomed in the attempt to use the rationale of public health to repress reporting on the origins of COVID? How much reporting was repressed into the origins of COVID? I mean, it's been actively investigated since we had COVID. And the efficacy of public health measures like social distancing, lockdowns, and masking school children in classrooms. Oh, so this is the first time in history when people who thought they had power tried to promote a particular hero system and claimed that other people operating from a different hero system were dangerous. This is how human societies have always operated. Right? People have always tried to promote their hero system. They have always regarded many different competing hero systems as bad, and they've always tried to reduce the ability of people to push hero systems that invalidate one's own hero system. I remember working at Cahill News, and we would try to make the point about, say, basic California speeding law is that you never drive faster than the conditions allow. Right? We would essentially ally ourselves with law enforcement much of the time and with government to try to promote the common good. Evidence that ran contrary to the preferred narratives of the party's public health wing was labeled disinformation. When has evidence that invalidates the closely held hero systems of people promoting something and trying to diminish that which invalidates their hero system, when has that not been suppressed? Tell me about this golden time. But contrary narratives were labeled disinformation, implying that naysayers were themselves part of a conspiracy to mislead the public. If you believe that your hero system is true, competing hero systems that invalidate your hero system are part of a conspiracy meant to mislead people. If you believe that Jesus Christ died on a cross to save you from sin, by believing in Jesus, you can live eternally. You believe that all those hero systems that invalidate your claims are conspiracies to mislead the public. They're products of Satan. Conversely, party-sanctioned protests of the death of George Floyd were presented as a moment of racial reckoning that would help free the nation from Donald Trump, in the service of which the press propagated inflammatory falsehoods about the frequency with which black men were shot by white police officers. That's true. And when has it ever been different? When has the press abstained from propagating inflammatory falsehoods that happened to align with their hero system? Where does this happen? Show me this golden land where this doesn't happen. How is this even possible? It's not possible in any human society. The attempts to use technology to game a new, officially sanctioned reality that would rid the nation of Trump reached new heights during the presidential election campaign in October 2020. At the height of the presidential campaign, which saw wall-to-wall press coverage of a public statement by 51 former high intelligence officials who testified in careful legalese that Hunter Biden's laptop, which contained reams of evidence of the involvement of both Bidens in foreign bribery and lobbying schemes while Joe Biden was vice president, was a fake and itself most likely the product of a Russian plot. Oh my God, so we've never before seen among political operatives and members of the news media who shared their hero system attempts to invalidate information that is dangerous to their hero system. This is how it has always been. This is how it will always be. In reality, it was Hunter Biden's laptop. oh my God, you mean people with an agenda pushed things that were false? My God, this is the first time this has ever happened. Trump lost the election while public confidence in intelligence agencies and the press alike achieved new lows, what might be described as a raging bonfire of social trust. Yeah, there's some, right, that's a good point. It's not entirely out to lunch.
Famously a darling of the British media prior to World War II. They really were in favor, right? The reason I'm using a sarcastic tone is because, as historians have pointed out, he was not promoted by the media prior to World War II, and even post World War II, he doesn't remain the prime minister. So, yeah, just this presentation, as you heard, is linking Churchill to pro-Zionist financiers, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The dog whistles are whistling, and I can hear them. It doesn't take very long, and that not being the primary motivation, okay, sure, but certainly clear that.
So I've had to get my second crown, and I've had a temporary crown in, and it came out last night, and I immediately got mad. But it was entirely my fault. I was chewing gum on that side of my mouth where I had a temporary crown in, and they didn't explicit don't chew gum, but they did say, like, don't eat anything sticky or crunchy, or be very careful. So my immediate impulse, my overwhelming impulse, was to blame the person who put my temporary crown in, but it was entirely my fault. I was an idiot because I've had a temporary crown before that came out. I had a regular crown that came out because I was chewing gum. So I should have known better. It was entirely my fault that my temporary crown came out. But my God, when I drink water, it's like, it just kills me. It's so painful. But it's entirely my fault. But I just so wanted to blame it on someone else. Do you think I wanted to take responsibility that I had chosen badly?
The things that's in the matrix of contributing factors.
Yeah, that's right. And in the long thread that he made sort of in defense against some of the pushback he got from that interview, he does walk back that stuff a bit, which is partly what I was thinking of, but not nearly enough. But
talking about Darryl Cooper there. Okay. I know you are on the edge of your seat. You've got your whole family gathered around. When whatever equivalent of the church committee investigates the insanity that we are living through these days, I don't find it that insane. It's just people with a certain hero system. As we've had, for example, more women moving into academia, right? The values of women have taken precedence over what have heretofore been less challenged values of men about more open and robust discourse, which is itself a hopeful thought. There will surely bring to light a large complex of official or semi-official information threat programs run by U.S. intelligence agencies, whose goal is ostensibly to protect America from foreign propaganda aimed at causing exactly the kind of social disintegration that the machine and its servants have themselves inflicted at home. Now, that's an interesting point. But given America's varied composition of different groups, different races, different religions, even if we had none of this, social cohesion and social trust wouldn't be that much stronger, right? We evolved to trust people who are like ourselves. And as America becomes more diverse, meaning we have less and less common with each other, we will have less social cohesion and social trust, even if there is none of the things here that David Samuels is talking about. The most simple explanations for these things that he's fulminating about are just too simple and boring for him to point out. In a world, my God, it sounds like a movie. In a world in which, you don't need in which, you can just say in a world in which the sitting president of the United States is first to be declared to be functioning at the height of his powers. Well, guess what? Political operatives have often told lies to advance their cause. Right? This is not something that is unique to the Biden administration. Did you know that there are political operatives favoring Donald Trump who also tell lies? In a world in which the sitting president of the United States is first declared to be functioning at the height of his powers and then abruptly replaced on the Democratic ticket by an unseen hand, overwhelmingly Americans wanted this to happen. That's the unseen hand, because he is senile. raising the question of who is actually running the most powerful nation on earth. There has never been one person running the most powerful nation on earth. Never, ever. There has never been a powerful nation run by just one person, right? It's always required agencies and institutions and groups and advisors and a whole string of people. It's hard to dismiss the idea that conspiracies are real and that mainstream accounts of events are pap. In this new landscape of ops and counter-ops. Oh, so when exactly did we have a landscape free of ops and counter-ops? Tell me about that golden time. Tell me about that golden country that's free of ops and counter-ops. I want to visit there. Perhaps our two most successful conspiracists are Tucker Carlson and his fellow MAGA affiliate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Both men speak of plots that are hidden from view but propel large events, as do most of our leading intellectual elites who talk about the vast evils of institutional racism, right? Which is hidden from view, but apparently it propels. And of motivations that are different from those regularly proclaimed by officials in the mainstream press. My God, did you realize that Tucker Carlson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. have distinct hero systems from our dominant elite? My God, I'm sure glad that I got to read David Samuels to find that out, because otherwise it never would have occurred to me. Both have had their own claims repeatedly fact-checked and debunked by mainstream propaganda outlets. Are there any people proposing views of reality that have proven to become popular that have not been fact-checked and debunked by mainstream propaganda outlets? Please tell me about such persons. Though it is curious that the venom with which Kennedy's theories are greeted has been almost entirely lacking in treatment of Carlson. Is that true? Did you know that there's been no venom in the treatment of Tucker Carlson? What planet is this guy living on? He is completely divorced from reality. He is just making war on reality. Right? There has been enormous amounts of venom directed at Tucker Carlson and his conspiracy theories. The reason that there's venom for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s conspiracy theories is that they dramatically reduce the quality of health in our society and people who adopt them. About the simplest, easiest thing that you can do for your health is to get a vaccination that is regarded as legitimate by the U.S. government and the CDC and the FDA and whoever's involved. Go get the vaccinations that are promoted by your doctor, your doctors, and it's probably the simplest, easiest thing that you can do for your health. Now, a vaccination, some magic key that ends all your health problems? No. Apparently, from what I've read, the benefits of a COVID vaccination are pretty much gone 6, 7, 8, 9 months later. And that's why you need to get a booster shot. That's my understanding of the scientific papers on the topic. Perhaps this is because RFK Jr. is seen as a traitor to the Democrat. You don't need to explain something that doesn't exist. Right? There's plenty of venom directed towards Tucker Carlson. May also have something to do with the very different directions in which their theorizing takes their followers. Kennedy's theorizing, whether about childhood vaccines or plastics or environmental waste or the assassination of his uncle and his father, make his followers aware of specific exercises of power by real people, which it is conceivably possible for them to fight. Well, how much success have they had in fighting on behalf of Kennedy's theorizing? Zero, zilch, nada. How much success might they possibly have in fighting for these bizarre theories by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Zip, zero, zilch, nada. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. makes his followers aware of specific exercises of power by real people, which it is conceivably possible for them to fight. Yeah, not on planet Earth, right? Maybe in the imagination of David Samuels. If the ever-multiplying number of childhood vaccines isn't causing a massive upsurge in autism over the past 40 years, something clearly is. Yeah, maybe there are new incentives and new practices that tend to diagnose that which was not diagnosed, right? Many people are now diagnosed with autism that 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago would not have been diagnosed with autism. And it's not at all clear that the massive upsurge in autism diagnosis is caused by something in the environment. But according to David Samuels, that cause is likely, at least in part, environmental. Same is true of Kennedy's theorizing. There's absolutely no evidence that the increase in autism is caused by vaccines, right? Just completely absurd. And that David Samuels retails this, shame on him. He's got lousy epistemics. He's making the world a worse place by promoting this untrue, bizarre, fanciful, self-aggrandizing perspective on life. Shame on David Samuels and everyone who enables him and says, you go, David. But for everyone who is close to him and doesn't try to raise alarm bells by his descent into idiocy and lunacy. Same is true of Kennedy's theorizing about his uncle's assassination, which points to the role of our intelligence agencies in destroying our liberties. Oh, so American liberties are destroyed. So tell me about the time when our liberties were not diminished. Tell me about the countries where they have stronger liberties than we enjoy in America. Let me venture to these golden lands. Let me read about them at least. They don't exist. Shame on you, David Samuels. You're a serial fabricator, liar, conspiracy theorist who's making the world a worse place. You have descended into idiocy and lunacy. And how would you compare the reduction in our liberties caused by our intelligence agencies with the reduction in our liberties caused by civil rights legislation? So here's how I would compare it. I would say we've lost 100 times more liberty due to civil rights legislation than due to our intelligence agencies. Just David Samuels just completely lacks perspective on reality. He is completely divorced from reality. Same is true of Kennedy's theorizing about his uncle's assassination, which points to the role of our intelligence agencies in destroying our liberties, which again is real. Yeah, how real is it compared to the decrease in liberties caused by civil rights? But even talking about liberty entirely depends upon your hero system. There is no meaningful objective definition of reality outside of a particular hero system. Only when you understand where someone's coming from, their hero system, can you then understand by what they mean by liberty or democracy. Even if this or that attempt to connect the dots in a specific way might be debunked, which is itself a word that now suggests not an objective truth-seeking exercise, but an attempt to define reality in terms favorable to the speaker or whatever forces they represent. Generally speaking, debunked is a useful term to refer to that which has been debunked. Sometimes the term is misused. I think it's generally useful. Unless it's being obviously used in a partisan fashion, it's a pretty good, useful word. One of the things that RFK Jr.'s critics generally miss about his theories is that they are based on evidence which he regularly submits to courts of law. Is this true? I simply don't know enough. I am highly skeptical because there aren't any academic studies. There is no empirical based validation for RFK Jr.'s theorizing that is off the beaten path, right? Nobody has bothered to provide an empirical foundation for it. So if it is as empirically based as David Samuels claims, why isn't he footnoting where there is evidence for that? Many of his lawsuits have been successful. Did you know that sometimes there are successful lawsuits that are not 100% based on empirical truth? Yes, it has been known to have lawsuits even returning billions of dollars to people that are not 100% grounded in empirical truth. I know that's shocking. I know that's never even occurred to anyone. But sometimes people win lawsuits even when they do it by engaging in less than 100% truthful tactics. So just because people win a lawsuit does not mean that they are right. Just because people lose a lawsuit does not mean that they are wrong. Just means that you've had a bureaucratic decision. That's it. The idea that powerful corporations and agencies are polluting our food, water, and air, along with our domestic politics, are real concerns with potential real solutions. Right? These are real concerns. They have occupied a substantial part of the news and of our discourse and of litigation, and they are often addressed with potential real solutions which can be effected through individual and collective action. Yes, they can. Unless, of course, you believe it's all the fault of the space aliens. So where on earth do you have corporations and agencies that do substantially less polluting of our food, water, and air, right? Let me visit these golden lands where you have businesses that don't pollute. Right? David Samuels is polluting our discourse with his crazy, non-empirical, plea for attention essays such as this one. Unless you believe it's the fault of an all-powerful Jewish conspiracy, in which case there's probably not much you or I can do about it. Well, you can do just as much about an all-powerful Jewish conspiracy theory as you can do about arguing that vaccines cause autism. There's absolutely nothing you can do based on current evidence to render public policy that vaccines cause autism. And with regard to believing in an all-powerful Jewish conspiracy, you can choose to create a life that reduces the influence of this all-powerful Jewish conspiracy. Unlike RFK Jr., who grew up on the side of his father and his uncles, both devoted readers of Camus. Yeah, so because RFK Jr. had a father and an uncle who read Camus, therefore what? Tucker Carlson grew up in Washington as the son of Dick Carlson, who served as chief propagandist for the United States government at the height of the Cold War, meaning Voice of America. Now, is the amount of empirical truth that was given over by Voice of America under the reign of Dick Carlson, was it dramatically less than the amount of truth given over by the New York Times or the Washington Post? Whatever myths were spread about the United States and its role in the world during and after World War II, which Tucker Carlson presents himself as fervently opposing, his father was a key figure in spreading those lies. Does Tucker Carlson present himself as fervently opposing myths spread about America? I know he fervently opposes some myths, and I guarantee you that he fervently supports other myths. And I'm sure that most people who are interested in American history support some myths and oppose other myths. So in that regard, Tucker Carlson is not exceptional.
Do go on, Chris. Do go on.
Okay, so well, this is just the last step from this particular interview. So, and this is just to highlight Tucker and his epistemic standards, right? So Tucker, throughout all of this, is saying you can't even question these things. Nobody, and both of them are presenting it like nobody has been allowed to look at the history of World War II in any critical depth. Like nobody's ever considered things.
So I almost ordered some plastic glue, or I got plastic glue to put this temporary crown back in. Then I ordered dental glue. You can buy dental glue, which works temporarily. Yes, I am animated tonight, which is a good challenge to all the shows and streams that I've done without animation. Maybe I should just shut the heck up when I'm not animated and just save myself for those times when I can't get animated. So who exactly was Dick Carlson? Where did he come from? Neither Tucker nor his father knows for sure. Dick Carlson was a bastard. His mother, then a junior in high school, starved herself in the hopes of keeping her pregnancy a secret. She then abandoned her child, who was crippled with rickets, to the mercies of the foster care system, whereupon the child's ostensible father, whose name was Boynton, shot and killed himself. The boy was then eventually adopted by a wool merchant named Carlson, who died when the boy was 12. Point being that motherless orphans are the stuff out of which state propagandists are classically made. Oh, given the flexibility which the author throws around the term state propagandist, I am willing to bet that more than 50% of state propagandists are not motherless orphans. Are not all orphans motherless? Is that not repetitive? In Dick Carlson's case, he became a state propagandist after his, well, do we call publicists propagandists? That's what they do. So he became a state propagandist after his first career as a journalist went sideways. A story he wrote using San Francisco Mayor Joe Alioto of imaginary ties to the mafia spawned a massive lawsuit and wound up bankrupting Look magazine, one of the journalistic icons of the 1960s. Following that debacle, Carlson became an officer of a politically corrupt savings and loan in Southern California, which held a sweetheart mortgage on the home of U.S. Attorney General Ed Meese, while bankrupting thousands of ordinary Californians, as opposed to which nation states where you don't have this type of corruption. His appointment as director of the Voice of America duly followed. Like his father, Tucker Carlson is a propagandist. Yes, Tucker Carlson is a propagandist. I think that's fair. And he's a frequently hilarious propagandist. His talent is different than his father's, though. Where Dick Carlson channeled the official voice of Cold War America, Tucker Carlson's ability to mix different types of conspiracy theorizing allows him to position himself on the side of his audience, offering them solace while actually making them miserable. Look, conspiracy theories don't make people miserable. Conspiracy theories are embraced by people who are already miracle, right? Recognizing the difference between cause and effect, I would think that someone as high status and prestigious and widely published as David Samuels, I think he'd understand that elementary part of logic. Tucker Carlson's aims can be best judged by the mix of conspiracy theories that he advances. There is the outlandish weekly world news style stuff about aliens and pyramids, which undermines his listeners' attachments to reality by suggesting that the foundations of our common history are fake. How significantly do you think that his conspiracy theories about aliens undermine his listeners' attachment to reality? And how undermined is his listeners' attachment to reality? Even those believing in the most absurd conspiracy theories are sufficiently attached in reality to insist that they get paid for their work, that they spend time around people that they like to spend time with, that they pursue their hobbies, and they pursue their interests in an entirely realistic way. Right? Just because you believe in colorful and exciting conspiracy theories does not mean that you are detached from reality. Right? We're all detached from reality in some ways and have some approximation of reality in other ways. Do you honestly think that if I was 100% attached to reality, I would do as many live streams as I do? No, it's only because I'm delusional about the importance of my live streams that I do so many live streams. If I was realistic about my live streams, I wouldn't do nearly as many live streams. Right? I'd work a conventional job earning $50, $60 an hour and make money. But thanks to my delusions, I pour out a lot of live streams, which 500 people may end up listening to. There is the debunking of America's history as a nation. How much has that been the focus of Tucker Carlson? You'd have to go debunking which history of America as a nation, right? There are thousands of histories of America as a nation in which unifying causes like World War II are transformed into devices to corrode his followers' sense of the good in their ancestors. Has Tucker Carlson made it a prime mission to corrode his followers' sense of the good in their ancestors? That's nonsense. David Samuels just makes that up. There is the invocation of shadowy, all-powerful forces like the deep state, whose power is so great that it is impossible to even name them, let alone fight them. Okay, that's valid. Above all, there is the reflexive inversion of good and evil, whether in the case of World War II, of Vladimir Putin, or Israel's war against Hamas, which puts his listeners on the side of people, Nazis, Russian dictators, Muslim terrorists, they are formally and rightfully regarded as America's enemies. Really? You think that Tucker transforms them? I guarantee you that's not true. Right? He only takes people where they want to go. Right? I only take people where people want to go. Right? Someone who is dedicated to believing that what David Samuels is writing here is true and profound would not be shifted 1 centimeter by what I'm saying. Right? I only affect people to the degree they want to be affected. Tucker Carlson only changes people to the degree they want to be changed. I can't, Tucker can't, David Samuels can't take you anywhere that you don't already want to go. A witchy woman can't take you anywhere that you don't want to already go. A rabbi, a silver-tongued priest, a charismatic attorney can't take you anywhere that you don't already want to go. A university professor, a pundit, a live streamer, a blogger, an author, a public intellectual, a guru, a yoga teacher cannot take you anywhere you don't want to go. Your friends can't take you anywhere you don't want to go. Your family can't take you anywhere in terms of how you view the world that you don't want to go. Tucker nudges his audience towards accepting current Democratic Party establishment wisdom. Yeah, that's what Tucker's known for. That's absurd. That Israel is bad, Iran is good, there's no such thing as terrorism, good and evil don't exist, under the guise of being free thinkers and questioning authority. Right? This is not fair to Tucker. There's elements of it that are true. The conspiracies that Carlson embraces and advances are hardly intended to empower his listeners. My God, are you saying that the things that pundits and live streamers and gurus and public intellectuals propagate are not primarily designed to be truthful or good for their listeners, but are instead primarily about self-aggrandizement? Oh my God, why didn't I ever think that before? Surely Tucker Carlson's the only would-be guru and pundit who is not optimizing for truth and goodness, but instead is optimizing for his own self-aggrandizement. That's shocking. I didn't know there were people in public life who optimize for their own self-aggrandizement. Wow.
From the German perspective, right? Which is an insane claim to make, given, as many people have pointed out, the History Channel, even the History Channel, setting aside all the books and things written, is in large part comprised by documentaries about World War II and Hitler and all these kind of things. And it is not the case that nobody talked about what caused the rise of the Nazis or why there was sympathy for Hitler's point of view in Germany and so on. But anyway, let's just hear Tucker responding to one point. And
so the reason I'm drinking my water like with my head tilted to the side, because if the water hits where my crown fell out, whoa, my God. The conspiracies Tucker Carlson embraces and advances are hardly intended to empower his listeners. Well, conspiracy theories, when they're completely bogus and discredited, don't empower people. But empowered people don't seek out conspiracy theories in the first place. Only losers seek out ridiculous conspiracy theories. Rather, they are what cynics in the TV business used to call boob bait. Did aliens build the pyramids? Do Zionists control Congress by assigning minders to each individual member of Congress? I thought AIPAC did have someone connected to each member of Congress. Maybe that's false. So what percentage is this true? Do Zionists control members of Congress by assigning minders to each individual member of Congress? I honestly don't know. I thought that was true. Were Adolf Hitler's intentions mostly or entirely peaceful? No. Until he got suckered into World War II by Winston Churchill. That's ridiculous. Is the deep state pumping money into Ukraine to fund its fentanyl business through Goldman Sachs? I am skeptical. Do Nephilim, angels from the Bible, walk among us here on earth, giants? The theses behind these statements, which are phrased as questions, the answer in every case being yes, range from the demonstrably false to the absurd. But is it wrong to ask these questions? The answer is yes, not because they violate social taboos or exacerbate hatreds, but because they are demonstrably nonsense. In being nonsense, they can only lead followers deeper into a maze of further falsehoods that darken rather than illuminate the forces that impact their lives. Right? He's getting causation wrong. It's only because people are already losing at life that they go for these ridiculous conspiracy theories. By neutralizing people who are potentially right to do something about their forces that are destroying their communities and their lives, Tucker Carlson's pose as a skeptic of official explanations and an opponent of power serves the interests of those who rule. So, what percentage of people who are loyal Tucker Carlson listeners do you think would otherwise actually do something about their lives and their communities, if not for listening to Tucker? I would say the percentage is below 0.1, and I can demonstrate it to you. We did not evolve to be gullible. My God. It is a certainty that Americans have committed all the sins of the Bible in spades. Oh, as opposed to which other people who have not committed all the sins of the Bible in spades? There is no people on earth who have not committed all the sins of the Bible in spades. Totally meaningless point. And will no doubt continue to do so, as will every other people that lives. America has elevated some inhabitants of its soil over others. Right? Every nation has done the same thing while poisoning the earth. Is there any first world nation state that has not done some poisoning the earth, the air, and the water? Okay, let me read this sentence in full before I dissect it. America has elevated some inhabitants of its soil over others while poisoning the earth, the air, and the water, and funding just and unjust, destructive wars that have ruined entire countries and blighted the lives of future generations. Okay, is there any nation with the power to do any of these things that has not done these things? Right? America is a flawed nation just like every other nation. Say that all nations have committed similar or worse crimes? True. and that our intentions were mostly good, hardly lets America off the hook. Who said anything about intentions? Who cares about intentions? We don't even know what the intentions were, right? America is part of the human condition, but none of that goes to the core of what it means to be an American. Oh, my God, what does it mean to be an American? Which is a simple, life-changing act of allegiance. Wow, that's exciting. It means accepting the promise of freedom that is written in the country's founding documents, has been renewed in every generation by the creativity and sacrifice of brave men and women. That's what it means to be American. That's just empirically true? No, it's one projection. It's one hero system. Right? There are many different American hero systems. That he thinks that this is just objectively true is silly. It means being the recipient of an incredible world-shaping act of collective generosity begun by our country's founding fathers and carried through successive generations. Our country's founding fathers, just like us, were a product of their genetics and their environment, right? If you had different genetics, we would not have had the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution as it currently is constituted. If we had a different environment, we would not have had the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution as it is currently founded. Right? Everything that you see in a culture and a political system and a legal system is a product of genetics and environment. Right? Change the genetics, you'll change the end product. Change the environment, you'll change the end product. Palestinians are not doomed to simply be a loser people who loves to commit violent acts of terrorism. That is the response of a particular set of genetics in a particular situation. It means privileging the future over the injuries and disappointments of the past. Did you know that's what it means to be an American? To have a worldview that privileges the future over the injuries and disappointments of the past? Being an American requires us to believe in freedom's promise, which is founded on hope. Like, oh, beautiful words and just pure paplum. Being an American means that you are a United States citizen, and there were certain traits of Americans which were more true in the past when we had a more homogeneous nation. Now, with an increasingly diverse nation, any such traits are less dominant. It is certainly possible to technically be an American and to believe in none of the above. Yeah, most Americans probably don't believe strongly in any of that. You have to be an intellectual to believe in all those things. It's a sad fact of human nature. The majority of human beings in all times and places would prefer being slaves to being free. Right, meaningless statement. What constitutes being free depends entirely on your hero system. There is no objective nature of being free. Some people choose to be slaves to money, others to food, alcohol, or drugs. Really? You think people really choose to be slaves? Or they just simply have a different understanding of freedom, right? When alcoholics drink, when porn addicts use porn, they are not consciously choosing slavery. They are consciously choosing that which they feel makes them free. And to your hero system makes them slaves. So whether they are free or slaves depends on the nature of your hero system. What of the fantasy of God's final justice being brought down to earth? Right, all good men are slaves. Right, you're a slave to higher ideals. So we're all slaves, and we all have some degree of freedom. And what exactly constitutes the nature of our slavery and what constitutes the nature of our freedom depends entirely upon the subjective nature of our hero system. Freedom can be a terrible drag. Guess what? Slavery can be a terrible drag. As Bob Dylan once concluded, you got to serve somebody. There's a good point. Maybe or maybe not. After all, Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize in Literature, which has been routinely denied to truly great American writers, from Gertrude Stein to Fitzgerald and Ralph Ellison to Pynchon and DeLillo and Robert Stone and Philip Roth. That's because the Nobel Prize is more likely to be awarded to writers who think and write the way that the rest of the world does, which means subscribing to beliefs such as the idea that people are born into unchanging fates, that the needs of the collective should take precedence over the needs of the individual, that the sky is falling, that blood ties are destiny. Guess what? Blood ties are quite influential. And you know what's also approximately equally influential? Environment. So pretty much everything comes down to genetics and environment. And then, due to my particular combination of genetics and environment, I believe in something called free will, right, which I put on top of genetics and environment. That just comes from my own particular hero system. So the world is naturally divided into the categories of oppressed and oppressors. There is some some use in dividing the world that way. That historical grievances are holy. Which people does not have grievances they regard as holy? That rights are a thing permitted individuals by the state. Rights are a thing permitted individuals by their nation state. Rights don't have any meaning outside of a nation state. Cold, harsh truth. And that the future will always be worse than the past. This uniquely non-American way of thinking was on display in the interview Tucker aired this month with podcaster Darryl Cooper, who, judging by his personal hatred of the police, rabid support for Palestine, and belief that mass migration should be embraced by all right-thinking Americans, seems like a pretty conventional leftist. He also has various offbeat feelings about Churchill, Hitler, and World War II, and displays Nazi memorabilia on his social media account. For Cooper's host, whose own tweet about the conversation is up to 34 million views, it was a solid day's work. Hey, Darryl Cooper is not a leftist because he does not, to the best of my ability, I know very little about him, but to the best of my ability, he does not primarily believe in equality and that the greatest evils are ignorance and bigotry. And I suspect he does not believe that new ways of organizing families are better than traditional ways. Right? I suspect, given his affection for Nazi Germany, right, he's right-wing. Right? Nazi Germany was right-wing. I suspect that Nazi apologist Darryl Cooper is right-wing.
And the level of epistemic seriousness that he brings here.
And there's also peril in knowing the truth about things. I mean, when we finally find out how President Kennedy was murdered in 1963, when we finally find out what all these weird lights in the sky are at night, when we really get to the truth of that, will we be better off or not? I mean, those are fair questions. I don't know the answer. But let me just say what I completely agree with you. Any unifying myth, is important. I'm just highly distressed.
Wow, Tucker Carlson believes that any unifying myth is important. Doesn't sound like the description of Tucker Carlson given by David Samuels. Whether Tucker Carlson is himself an anti-Semite, right, such a tiresome label, right? Certain people in certain situations will be naturally inclined to critical views of Jews. Other people in other situations will be indifferent, and other people in other situations will be inclined towards positive views of Jews or blacks or gays or Christians or white people or Koreans, right? Depends on the situation and the person. So whether Tucker Carlson is himself an anti-Semite is as uninteresting. Yeah, it's uninteresting because it's not a useful category, right? There are people who hate Jews, right? Jew haters. As a question of whether he suffers from other degenerative or mental or physical diseases. I'd say that's interesting. What's interesting is the way he plays the game, which in turn sheds light on the nature of the game that he's playing. The way that Tucker Carlson plays the game is to maximize the amount of attention he gets. Did you know the way that David Samuels plays the game? Did you know the way that Luke Ford plays the game? Right? We each try to maximize the particular type of attention that we want. Right? One reason that I try to behave in an upstanding, ethical, devoted to truth, optimizing for truth and decency fashion is that I want positive attention from people who are important to me. David Samuels wants positive attention from people who are important to him. Tucker Carlson wants positive attention from the people who are important to him. We all want positive attention from the people who are important to us. And that's not natural and healthy. Tucker positions himself as a skeptic who is generously open to revisionist theories and questioning. He positions himself as a skeptic when it aligns with what his audience wants or what he thinks his audience wants or what's in alignment with his other tendencies. Right? Nobody is skeptical about everything. Right? Every skeptic, right, is a rabid believer in some things. And he lets his guests like Darryl Cooper, Congressman Thomas Massey, heretic Harpy Candace Owens, and a former artillery colonel named Douglas McGregor do the dirty work of talking about Zionist minders or the virtues of Hitler or Israel's deliberate targeting of Christian churches and holy sites in Gaza. Point of all these is to mainstream conspiratorial anti-Semitic poison on the American right. You think that that's primarily what Tucker's doing, or you think that he's received so much success from questioning conventional wisdom that he has gone too far, that he has become addicted to questioning the conventional wisdom even when that is wrong, right? Like many people outside of the mainstream, right? Such as people Like David Samuels, the author of this piece, they become addicted to being contrarian. Right? It's very easy to become addicted at that which funds you and feeds you and seems to serve you. Right? People don't become alcoholics because they're choosing to destroy their lives. They become alcoholics because alcohol starts out as a solution to their problems. Right? Being contrarian started out as a great thing for David Samuels and for Tucker Carlson and for Luke Ford. Right? We got high off of being contrarian, and then we all took it too far. Right? If you get laughs and applause and money for being funny, right, you'll at some point take it too far and be funny in an inappropriate way at an inappropriate time. And I hope that we'll all learn from that. And if you get money and applause and positive attention for being reckless or for being bold or for being sweet or for being provocative, right, you'll likely take that virtue and take it too far until you get blowback. And then I hope we'll all learn. While protesting that Tucker Carlson, is simply asking questions of people with heterodox views. Right? He got to where he is by being aligned with his audience and saying provocative things against the conventional wisdom. And that he is in no way responsible for the views of his guests or the deranged responses of his followers on social media, which are in fact the point of the exercise. The reason that Carlson is determined to keep a raised finger's width of distance between himself and the anti-Semites, he regularly platforms. Okay, so how many Jew-critical people are you allowed to talk to, as opposed to how many Jew-positive people are you allowed to talk to, and why are you only allowed to talk to one type? Right? I'm fine with talking to people who are Jew-critical and Jew-positive. I don't have much interest anymore having on as guests the idiots that Tucker Carlson regularly hosts. But there was a time when I had a lot of idiots on my show. So the reason that Carlson keeps a distance between himself and the anti-Semites he regularly platforms is that anti-Semitism was never part of the American DNA. I suspect that if he consciously chooses to keep a distance, it's because either that's how he really believes or he thinks that's in his self-interest. I don't think it comes down to the American DNA. Rather, it stinks of the madness of old Europe, whose social hierarchies it was fashioned to uphold. It's also a mainstay of the official state propaganda of the rotten post-colonial societies whose politics Carlson wants his viewers to adopt. Seriously, you want to argue with me that Tucker Carlson wants his viewers to adopt the state propaganda of rotten post-colonial societies such as the Palestinians and the world's losers? Right? That Tucker Carlson might want them to adopt some tiny sliver of their worldview does not mean that he wants them to adopt the official state propaganda of the rotten post-colonial societies. That's nonsense. You think Tucker wants his viewers to adopt the official state propaganda of shithole countries? Of course he doesn't. That's ridiculous. Tucker Carlson can't be an anti-Semite, not openly, because being an American is part of his brand. I don't think that's the reason he's not an out-and-out anti-Semite, even as he works to undermine the connection of Americans to their own past. How many Tucker Carlson viewers do you think have been disconnected from their past who didn't want to be? I'll tell you, none. Right? No Tucker Carlson viewer who did not want to be disconnected from his past has become disconnected from his past due to Tucker Carlson. And to destroy their confidence, their ability to change their country for the better. What percentage of Tucker Carlson viewers you believe have had their confidence in their ability to change their country for the better destroyed by Tucker Carlson? I would wager a tiny, tiny bit, because we did not evolve to be gullible. No matter how prevalent anti-Semitism has historically been within the DC elite circles in which Carlson was raised. So, seriously, how prevalent do you think anti-Semitism was within the DC elite circles in which Carlson raised? I would wager that there was at least 10 times as much philo-Semitism as anti-Semitism within the DC elite circles in which Carlson was raised. It is also naturally repugnant to most Americans, meaning Americans by choice, whether or not they were born here. Americans by choice, whether or not they were born here, repugnant. Yeah. Americans in polite society don't like people who are public about their hatred of any particular other people, whether it's Jews or Christians or white people or black people. Right? It's not considered cool in any first world nation. It has nothing to do with America. That's not considered cool in France or in Japan or in England. The American instinct to recoil from anti-Semitism as a particularly toxic form of lunacy is a deeply rooted one. That's because America from its beginning was founded on an idea of exceptionalism that supposed not only a historical parallel, but an active spiritual connection between the new people that would come into being here and Israel's God. Yeah, it's one view for one type of American hero system, but far from the definitive, objective, dominant truth. Our forefathers saw themselves as the builders of a new Jerusalem, imagined their community as a covenantal entity chosen by the God of Israel, which is why they taught their children to read and speak Hebrew at places like Harvard and Yale, where students are more likely these days to wear keffiyehs. Dramatic overstatement. Zionism is also likewise an organic American belief held by relatively few Americans. Right? Americans, like Australians, like Japanese, like the French, like the Nigerians, are overwhelmingly concerned with their own people, not people on the other side of the world. Large numbers of 19th century American Christians were devoted to Zionists. Okay, what percentage do you think of 19th century American Christians were devoted to Zionists? I guarantee you that in terms of real visceral devotion, it was far less than 5%. And maybe 30% were, mildly sympathetic. Before most Jews in Europe ever thought of returning to their historical homeland. 19th century American Christians were Zionists not due to the influence of an evil Jewish cabal that controlled Congress 150 years ago, but because their own understanding of Christianity demanded it. Right? Most people don't have an intellectual understanding of the world, of their own religion, of politics, or philosophy, or of nationalism. Right? Nationalism is overwhelmingly experienced not as a rational philosophy. It's overwhelmingly experienced as a normal, natural human connection to your own people. They saw Christianity as the historical and spiritual child of Judaism. Do you think there was ever a time in the United States where most American Christians saw Christianity as the historical and spiritual child of Judaism? I guarantee no, because most American Christians, like most non-American Christians, did not have a historical, philosophical, and theological profound understanding of these matters. Right? Most people are not intellectuals. Only intellectuals get excited by these ideas, which offer Gentiles a chance to become participants in the story of God's chosen people. Right? Most people are Christians because they were raised Christian. Most people are Jews because they were raised Jewish. Not because they have any ideology or teleology or philosophy or theology. They understood their Christianity to be dependent on the prior historical and spiritual truths of Judaism to give meaning to its own promise of salvation, as St. Augustine powerfully reminded his flock, which in theory includes every actual believing Christian on earth. Right, this would be true of fewer than 1% of American Christians. To say otherwise in the name of Christianity, as Tucker Carlson and his fellow revisionists make a point of doing, is not an expression of faith. It is an anti-Christian heresy that also serves to cut off the American story at its root. It's not an anti-Christian heresy. Right? Christianity is primarily about Christians. Islam is primarily about the interests of Muslims. Judaism and Jewish identity is primarily about the interests of Jews. Japanese nationalism is primarily about the interests of the Japanese.
By the uses to which the myths about World War II have been put in the context of modern foreign policy, particularly the war in Ukraine. But not just the war in Ukraine, so many others. Churchill's the good guy, Neville Chamberlain's the bad guy. It's too pat. It's obviously quite banal, but it also has justified like the killing of millions of people since the end of the Second World War. And so I do think it's fair to ask, like, what really was going on?
Yeah.
What was going on, Matt? What is going on? It's so but
Yeah, Tucker is just a third worldist, man. He's just promoting the third world state propaganda of shithole countries.
now so pat to view people
Hitler as the
like
bad
Hitler as
guy.
a bad guy. Yeah, like he liked cats he painted. He, had real.
Right, back to David Samuel's writing in Tablet magazine. Contrary to what Carlson and his fellows might wish, there is no easy way to decouple the story of the Jewish people, which stretches from the Bible to the establishment of the present-day state of Israel, from either Christianity or the covenantal doctrine on which America was founded. There's no easy way, and yet 99% of Americans, in all practicality, are quite happy to do so. Right? Most Americans are not terribly tied up with this theology. Right? Only intellectuals, only those who largely live in an abstract world get all excited about these things. The only way to do so is through a wholesale rejection of the idea of American exceptionalism. Nationalism is not experienced primarily as a philosophy. Right? The idea that your people are exceptional is a normal, natural state of humanity. There's nothing American about it, which is the secular version of the biblical ideal of chosenness. And yet every people on earth regard themselves as exceptional, which means rejecting the foundations on which America and its freedoms were established. Once these foundations are rejected and negated, one is left with the conclusion that American history is no better, and in many cases probably worse, than the history of other nations. Guess what? There are ways that you can frame American history as better, the ways you can frame American history as worse, the ways you can frame it as the same. It depends on your hero system. And that the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights are merely political propaganda from a bygone era. Guess what? There are ways that the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights were political propaganda from a bygone era, and there are other ways that you can approach those documents. They're not exclusive of each other, right? You can, my God.
Romances.
He proposed peace treaties.
And Tucker's just wondering, Matt, when we find out what happened with the Kennedy assassination, with the flashing lights in the sky, these are just questions, right? But when we find out what's going on there, it's just that, the conspiratorial mindset, like you said, roams across the different topics and it links them all together. And the general thing is whatever the official narrative is has to be, wrong. But it's only specific official narratives because he's quite open to the official narrative of the Russian.
There is a terrific Substack called the United States of Exception. And he makes a terrific point here, which is relevant. Most people don't grasp nuance, right? So on the one hand, he can argue, out of all American presidents who have served during my lifetime, I have no more contempt for any of them than George W. Bush. Right? He's responsible for millions of deaths, squandering nearly 2 decades of American hegemony, playing whack-a-mole in the desert and blowing up brown people. His so-called war on terrorism undermined U.S. power relative to China, which may have accelerated the end of hegemony and raised the risk of great power war and nuclear escalation. He ripped up the anti-ballistic missile treaty, redoubled America's futile pursuit of national missile defense, which raised nuclear risk. There was justice in the world. Bush and his advisors would all be breaking rocks on a chain gang at Guantanamo Bay. You can absolutely make this case. On the other hand, the same author notes, I also have no greater respect for any president during my lifetime than I do for George W. Bush. Bush was an unparalleled leader on global health. He spent a great deal of political capital drumming up support for HIV, AIDS, antiretroviral treatment in Africa. If you look at a chart of life expectancy for countries that participated in Bush's AIDS program, PEPFAR, you can see how much of a game changer it was. Bush was responsible for saving about 25 million lives over 20 years with a budget of just 128 billion. That's about the same efficiency as the top global health and development charities in the world, and more than 5 times as many lives saved as the highest estimate of the number of people killed in the post-9/11 wars. As if that was not enough, George W. Bush also gave us the indomitable Matthew Scully, author of Dominion and the foremost Christian and conservative apologist for ethical veganism in the United States today. This author is an ethical veganist. Right, so he notes both things are true. Right, the same person can argue that George W. Bush was both the worst and the greatest president of his lifetime. My God, a little bit of nuance, mate.
For example.
Yeah, it is interesting that he sees the sort of more conventional histories of World War II, of which there have been so many thousands. It's got to be the most written about and filmed and discussed topic in history of all time. It's interesting how Tucker's framing there is that it's like the conventional view of it is like a myth, like the founding fathers or the, every country has their myths. And, like with most lies, I guess there are grains of truth to that. Obviously popular conceptions of pretty much all historical events do tend to be a little bit two-dimensional. But wow, I mean, he takes it to that next level, which is that, it's all a lie.
Tucker is often awful, terrible, horrible, reprehensible, disgusting, and he's often great, hilarious, and funny. He is a human being with the good sides and bad sides. Tellingly, the leading voice on the political left, the anti-exceptionalist argument over the past 2 decades has been Barack Obama, who in many ways is Tucker Carlson's political doppelganger. Obama began his political career by denouncing neocons, a political cult whose influence is vastly overstated, really? But which serves as a convenient metonym for Jews, and then began his presidency by stating, I believe in American exceptionalism, just as I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism, and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism, meaning he doesn't. Similarities between Obama's politics and Tucker Carlson's hardly stop at America's shores. Both men are suspicious of U.S. ties to Israel, seek to position the U.S. as sympathetic to Muslim terrorists who kill Americans. Really? Do you think Tucker Carlson's just super sympathetic to Muslims who kill Americans? I've never gotten that vibe from him. Both men feel entirely comfortable doing business with tyrants like Vladimir Putin and with Holocaust-denying theocracies like Iran. You sometimes have to do business with people you don't like very much. Both men share a common dislike for Winston Churchill, whose bust was removed from the White House under Obama and whom Carlson has recently painted as the chief villain of World War II. I didn't notice Tucker Carlson doing a lot of painting of Winston Churchill as the chief villain of World War II. That was his guest, right? Tucker Carlson, Darryl Cooper, 2 separate individuals who came together for an interview conducted by Tucker Carlson of Darryl Cooper. The main difference between them is that Obama was elected president of the United States twice, continues to live in Washington, D.C., and run the Democratic Party. Does lazy Barack Obama run the Democratic Party? Count me skeptical. Which is the most powerful entity in the country, having formed something like a state within a state that is attempting to control what we see, hear, and read, both from within and from outside our constitutional form of government. Interesting. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson lives in Maine, seems unlikely to ever be elected president of anything, though not for lack of interest on his part. If you truly believe that America's fate was about to be decided by the contest between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, the holographic representative of the Democratic Party machine, what would be the last thing you would do less than 3 months before the election? Somewhere high up on the list would be relitigating World War II and implying that American heroes who fought and died in that war sacrificed their lives for nothing due to the malignant deceptions of their puppet masters and the evil Winston Churchill, who was controlled by Zionists. Then there would be directly associating the Republican Party and its leader, Donald Trump, with Nazis, or else with Russia and Vladimir Putin, thereby validating the most common Democratic Party attack lines against Trump over the past decade. One might associate Donald Trump's chief surrogates with people who promote Nazis. One might also argue that Joe Biden's recklessly pro-Israel foreign policy endangers America, that the mass demonstrators who celebrate foreign terrorist organizations while driving Jews off college campuses are important campaigners for human rights. Exactly how many Jews have been driven off college campuses in the past year by anti-Israel demonstrators? I suspect very few. One might platform anti-Semites and inject their poison into the bloodstream of the Republican Party, making it clear to Jews and to most normal Americans that conspiratorial anti-Semitism is equally, if not more, at home on the right as it is on the left. One could launch one's own cross-country political tent show tour to compete with Trump, steal his thunder less than 2 months before Election Day. I don't think this is what Tucker is doing. I think Tucker is drunk on his contrarianism, and he made a big effing mistake. Tucker Carlson has done all of the above. The question is why? The conspiratorial explanation, which, like all proper conspiracy theories these days, is an attempt to make sense of an incomplete public record through logical induction backed by whatever degree of off-the-record sourcing, goes something like this. All right, this is interesting. I'll give this to David Samuels here. In April of last year, Tucker Carlson was fired by Fox. According to Carlson in a book he published last year, Tucker Carlson didn't publish a book last year. Oh, yes, he did. Did he? Was it the collection of his essays? Okay. His firing was part of Fox's $787.5 million settlement of the defamation lawsuit filed by Dominion Voting Systems against the network for its allegations of voter fraud during the 2020 election. I have no reason to doubt that Carlson is telling the truth about a matter of public record, which he played a key role. What's odd about his explanation in the wider scheme of things, though, is that text messages he leaked to reporters following the settlement made it clear that. Now, do we know that Tucker leaked those text messages? I don't think so. It made it clear that in the moment, Carlson had vehemently opposed the network's decision to air allegations against Dominion, openly declaring them to be nonsense. So why would Dominion Voting Systems, which had Carlson's text in its possession as the resort of pretrial discovery demand that he alone, out of everyone who worked at Fox, be fired? The answer is that Fox's decision to fork over the better part of $1 billion to Dominion was most likely not motivated by the strength of the company's lawsuit, which could have been easily defended on First Amendment grounds and at a much smaller cost. I don't know any lawyers who say that. So David Samuels is not a lawyer, right? He uses no footnotes. That's bonkers. Rather, it was propelled by Fox's fear of the federal government, which was controlled by the political party that Murdoch has spent his life opposing. Why would Fox be more afraid of the federal government now than in the past? I mean, I find this thesis provocative. The dangers that Murdoch faced from the Dominion lawsuit, apart from the merits of the suit itself, were twofold. First danger was the United States Justice Department, which was busy putting over 1,000 civilian trespassers in jail for taking part in the January 6th riot at the Capitol with influence or joined the Dominion lawsuit, file a lawsuit of its own against Fox on much the same grounds as it prosecuted the rioters. That's provocative. I'm not aware of much evidence that's true. In a worst-case scenario, Fox might win the Dominion lawsuit only to have the Justice Department decide that Fox executives, including Murdoch, belonging in jail for their role in broadcasting the disinformation, which in turn led to a mob storming the Capitol. So I would put the likelihood of this being true at less than 10%. Given the existing legal context prior to the Supreme Court's recent January 6th decision, any lawyer that Fox hired would have had to raise the possibility of future or concurrent Justice Department action in the event the Dominion lawsuit went to trial, even if Fox won. Right? Which lawyers make this point? Right? I would like to read this point from a lawyer, not from someone as removed from reality as David Samuel. The Dominion settlement was also likely motivated by fear of what the lawsuit could mean for Rupert Murdoch's attempt to pass on his empire to his eldest son, Lachlan. So here is how I assess truth, right? The thesis that David Samuels proposes is a legal thesis which people other than himself, lawyers, would have far more expertise. So which lawyers have made the argument that David Samuels articulated? I'm unaware of any doing so. There may well be some doing so, but are they great, accomplished lawyers making this argument? The Dominion lawsuit was also likely motivated by fear of what the lawsuit could mean for Rupert Murdoch's attempt to pass on his empire to his eldest son, Lachlan. So who has reported this out, and who with legal expertise and expertise in matters of succession has made this argument? As the Wall Street Journal has recently reported in detail, and as succession fans can easily imagine, this remains no simple task. Right, that sentence is true. The Murdoch family has been involved for the past few years in an inter-family dispute over the disposition of a trust that mandates that each of the 4 children that Rupert Murdoch had with his first 2 wives, Patricia Booker and Anna Murdoch Mann, receive equal shares in the trust that control Fox. Passing on Fox in its entirety to Lachlan therefore requires amending, i.e. breaking the terms of that trust, which in turn requires Rupert Murdoch to either engage in oppositional legal proceedings with his children, Prudence, Elizabeth, and James, all of whom are politically to the left of Lachlan, or to reach a financial settlement with them, which until lately seemed to be slow in coming. Either solution might open the door for intervention, whether direct or indirect, by one arm or another of the federal government. Okay, who with expertise has made this point with evidence? In order to achieve settlements, that doesn't make any sense. In order to achieve settlements in both cases and pass on the empire he spent his life building, apparently nobody checks David Samuels before he's published in Tablet Mag. Rupert Murdoch, one of the richest and most powerful men on the planet, was therefore in dire need of some reasonable form of assurance from the Democratic Party, which was then in power. Right. What's the likelihood that's true? Okay. In April 2023, Murdoch therefore had little choice but to cut a deal with whomever could safely promise him on behalf of the Democratic Party that whatever legal settlements he reached, both with Dominion and with his children, would not be subject to undue federal interference. The fact that Rupert Murdoch indeed reached a settlement with Dominion, no further charges were filed against Fox, and he's now reportedly in the process of reaching a settlement with his children that will leave Lachlan in charge of Fox, strongly suggests that such a deal was cut. Does it really? Does that suggest to you that some deal was cut? It is within that context that Tucker Carlson's version of his departure from Fox makes sense, with the caveat that Fox's settlement of the Dominion lawsuit involved not just Dominion but also the Democrats, which raises a second question: who leaked Carlson's exculpatory texts? The answer is that I have no idea. Wait, you just said Tucker leaked them. However, it is a basic principle of crime reporting, which is a subject I have some direct acquaintance with, that leaks that exonerate a person who is never charged with any crime are generally a prelude to a cooperation offer from the leaker. I don't know enough. Enter Omid Malik. Now, Tucker Carlson's main financial backer, Malik, was a New York-based investment banker and money manager who was described by the Daily Caller, the conservative website, in which he abruptly decided to invest a large chunk of money in 2020 as a lifelong Democrat and a donor to left-wing political candidates and causes. While it is possible to imagine that at the height of anti-Trump feeling in 2020, Malik decided to abandon his lifelong political allegiance to the Democratic Party and become a Republican instead, that would make him a rather unusual, even unique figure, especially among wealthy Muslim Democrats living in New York City. But again, anything is possible. Malik's day job is running Farvaha Partners, a boutique investment bank he founded. While boutique Wall Street investment banks have no obligation to be transparent about their investors and are often valued for doing the opposite, possible clue as to the source of at least some of the money Malik manages might be found in the name he chooses for his enterprise. The Farvaha is a symbol of the soul and of the idea of life after death that is common among people of Persian ancestry. Post-1979 became a favorite national symbol among the Iranian diaspora. Or perhaps the coincidence of that symbolism has nothing to do with this story at all. Perhaps Malik and Carlson simply met one night at a bar by chance, found they agreed about more than they disagreed on, including the idea that Zionists are bad, America's involvement in World War II is bad, Adolf Hitler is misunderstood, Winston Churchill is a villain, and lifelong Democrat Malik then handed over a large chunk of his own personal savings on the spot so that Tucker Carlson could found a new right-wing media empire centered around himself, i.e. both men are morons. I doubt that, though. A more likely possibility is that Omid Malik is backing Tucker Carlson at the behest of whatever power it is that does stuff like gather the signatures of 51 high-ranking U.S. intelligence officials on a letter declaring that Hunter Biden's laptop is a Russian op on the eve of an election. At the very least, the collision of American domestic politics, the U.S. intelligence community, and Pynchon-esque aesthetic is too enticing to ignore completely, especially when one tosses in the pervasive social media and spatial presence of however many thousands of FBI agents and subcontractors performing the outward behaviors of being neo-Nazis. That's not a conspiracy theory, by the way. Protecting the United States from terrorist attacks is the FBI's #1 priority, with domestic terrorism being on par with foreign-inspired terrorism and white supremacists being among the Bureau's chief domestic terrorist target. Well, the FBI does not call them white supremacists. As the FBI explains on its public website, the approach taken by the FBI in counterterrorism investigations is based on the need both to prevent incidents where possible and to react effectively after incidents occur. Our investigations focus on the unlawful activity of the group, not the ideological orientation of its members. When conducting investigations, the FBI collects information, not only serves as the basis of prosecution, but also builds an intelligence base to help prevent terrorist acts. Anyone familiar with COINTELPRO and other FBI radical infiltration programs in the 1960s knows exactly how this stuff works. Suffice it to say that a good friend in the U.S. intelligence community once estimated to me that by the time the Berlin Wall came down, a majority of the members of CP, Communist Party USA, and its various front organizations were FBI agents. Now, is this true? Well, somebody told David Samuel so. He knows it's true. It is reasonable to surmise that much the same type of thinking is happening now, with the key difference being that it's much easier to pose as a neo-Nazi or an anti-Semite on social media than it is to attend in-person meetings in someone's basement. Is that true? It's all but certain, then, that the U.S. government is spending an enormous amount of money, time, and effort pumping out anti-Semitic and neo-Nazi propaganda into the social media space in the hope of identifying actual anti-Semites and neo-Nazis. By enormous amount of money. How much do you think? All right, I would wager less than $1 billion. Probably less than $100 million. Future historians will tell us whether the cure is actually worse than the disease if there remains such a thing as historians. But either way, my God, so dramatic. The justification for the current wave of domestic anti-Semitic propaganda, echoing the propaganda lines of foreign enemies of America and being paid for in part by the FBI, will be simple. Namely, that the U.S. intelligence community has been tasked with protecting the domestic information space. My God, he sounds like Mike Benz. And that the free play of 350 million individual atoms is simply too dangerous to be allowed to continue unsupervised. In addition to amplifying anti-Semites, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists, it's also reasonable to assume that protecting the domestic information space also means creating or shaping buckets like the QAnon conspiracy, the massive multiplayer role-playing game that more or less miraculously disappeared after Joe Biden was inaugurated. Well, given that QAnon claimed that Joe Biden would never be inaugurated, it makes sense that it would disappear after Joe Biden was inaugurated. Whoever is in charge of this work would also be remiss in their duties. They did not consider the explosive potential inherent in Donald Trump losing another election, take measures to ensure that the reactions of his supporters are safely contained. At the very least, seems like the natural background for the plot of a Robert Stone novel. Do you follow me so far? If so, here's another clue worth clocking. September 4 was the kickoff date for Tucker Carlson's first ever 16-city live tour, which was set to... Wait, Tucker Carlson did a live tour in Australia prior to this, which was set to feature all of Donald Trump's surrogates for on-stage appearances, including J.D. Vance, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Kennedy's former running mate, Nicole Shanahan. According to a source, Tucker had taped a conversation with Vance in August. You don't need a source. We know that was true. But the interview he chose to open the curtains on his tour, which he dropped on September 2nd, 2 days before the tour began, was with Darryl Cooper. This choice, in turn, forced Trump and his surrogates into a bind. Either authenticate Darryl Cooper's anti-Semitic message by keeping silent while sitting chummily on stage with its messenger, or to draw even more attention by refusing to get on stage with him. All right, that's a good point.
Basically, it's a fabricated story. The truth was actually entirely different. In fact, the opposite of what everyone fondly believes. Hitler as the peacemaker, Winston Churchill and Britain as the aggressor. Yeah.
And also, I don't think it is that unknown now, like that there were atrocities committed by the Allies, right? Or that there was acts of war that would be regarded as horrendous war crimes now, right? Like bombing civilian populations or the atomic bombs, right? And what they did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These are all things that are not taboo to discuss.
Back to David Samuels writing in Tablet. Republicans chose to stay silent to go through with their appearances. A few days after the Cooper interview ran, Trump, who had Tucker sitting in the box with him at the opening of the Republican National Convention so that tens of millions of viewers would see it, released a video proclaiming himself to be the most pro-Israel president in history. RFK Jr. tweeted a photograph of his father with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Vance tweeted about meeting an Auschwitz survivor. I suppose these men did what they imagined they could to signal rejection of Carlson's poison, but their responses came off like hostage notes. That's a good point. I think David Samuels was very good in that paragraph. So why is Carlson using his platform and his following to hold Trump and the Republican Party hostage to anti-Semitism? So do you think this is deliberate, conscious choice by Carlson, or is it an unintended consequence of Tucker's addiction to attention and contrarianism? So I hold with the latter. There are three plausible explanations, beginning with the idea that Carlson himself is an anti-Semite. Even if that's true, it's too boring to be the whole story. Second is that Carlson wants to be president of the United States. He believes that Trump will lose, and he sees anti-Semitism as a useful wedge with which to break off a large chunk of the despondent MAGA base for himself, while denying that fraction to potential rivals. Right, I don't believe either of those. Third explanation is that Tucker Carlson is a Fed. I don't believe that either. In all three cases, Tucker's aim would be for Donald Trump to lose in November. Do I know any of this for sure? Nah. I'm just asking the hard questions everyone else is too scared to ask. Right, provocative conclusion there from David Samuels.
There's documentaries, there's debates, there's discussions, and there's been like various critical historical looks at various, like simplistic portrayals. But that is not the status. And even with that, you have historians who paint, more complex views of the history, but they're very clear about the role that Nazism and Hitler played and the atrocities that are on, the side of the Axis. And,
like they're very different things. You can take a critical view. Like there's a great space between some sort of simplistic good guys, bad guys narrative that they paint and this historical revisionism, Nazi apologetics that Darryl Cooper is doing. I mean, for example, you can point to the Versailles Treaty and the very harsh conditions that were imposed on Germany after World War I, and you can understand the causes, the economic crash, the worries about communism. Like you can look into the sort of understandable reasons why someone like Hitler would.
Okay, so I'm going to be featured in a new documentary coming out from the Daily Caller. It's called Selling Sex.
You guys ever date someone that did OnlyFans? Nah. That's some nasty stuff, man. I don't want nothing to do with that at all.
I have a friend who did OnlyFans and now she's a porn star. Like she was a stripper, then she started OnlyFans, and now she's like richer than I could possibly ever imagine.
I was in the porn industry for a little over 6 years. I did over 1,000 films. The data tells us it produces more financial income than the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NFL all combined.
One night, we just posted.
Okay, that's just false. Right, I'm sure people have said such a false thing, but that claim is not true. If this documentary was interested in truth, it would not have included such an allegation.
Like 2 pictures, came back to it, and there was literally like $8,000 in there.
I get an email from the school saying your kids are expelled immediately, like they cannot come back anymore.
Someone was using a drone to drop notes onto my balcony of my penthouse. I mean, I've had people want to pay me like $30,000 for one of my teeth.
If the most intense hour of your day is looking at pornography, are you going to be changed by all these studies that say it's bad for you?
It feels like a colossal enough of a problem that everyone would be talking about it.
Every roommate that I had, with the exception of one person, had either taken their own life or died of overdose.
My God, selling sex exclusively at dailycaller.com. Very lovely team of 3 young women.